If you're enjoying this video, smash that like button, subscribe, and hit the bell. Share it with your friends and let me know in the comments where you're watching from. Every like and subscribe helps the channel grow. The trees moved last night. I know how that sounds, but I saw it with my own eyes, and not just the usual swaying in the wind. These massive pines actually changed their position. I've marked their locations for weeks now, and this morning, they were in different spots. I'm starting to think I should have listened to the warnings. Let me back up a bit. My name is Daniel Halverson, and I'm a forest ranger stationed at the most remote outpost in Superior National Forest, Minnesota. It's winter of 1991, and I've been here for 3 months now. The nearest town is 80 miles away, and the only ways in or out are by floatplane or snowmobile. Most people would hate this kind of isolation, but for me, it was perfect. Or at least, I thought it was. I'm sitting in my small research cabin right now, watching the sun set through my window. The light looks strange as it filters through the pine branches, casting long shadows across the fresh snow. We just had our first big snowfall of the season, and everything is covered in white. On any other evening, I'd call it beautiful. The frozen lake in front of my cabin usually reflects the sunset like a mirror, and when the northern lights dance in the sky, it's like nature's own light show, but something feels different tonight. Wrong. The trees around my cabin are old, really old. Some of these pines have been here for over 300 years. They're giants, their trunks wider than my arms can reach around. Under normal circumstances, they're my whole reason for being here. I'm supposed to be studying them, measuring them, learning. They're secrets. Funny how that word, secrets, seems so much darker now. It started 3 days ago. I was doing my usual evening checks when I noticed something odd about the wind. You see, when wind blows through a forest, trees usually sway in random patterns. But these trees, they were moving together, like dancers in perfect sync. At first, I told myself it was just a trick of the light, or maybe I'd been alone too long. Then I started finding the footprints, not animal tracks or human boots. These were something else entirely, perfect circles in the snow, melted down to bare ground, even though the temperature hasn't gone above freezing in weeks. They always appear around certain groups of trees, the oldest ones in the forest. The smell is different too. Pine forests always have that fresh Christmas tree scent, but lately it's been getting stronger. Sometimes it's so powerful it makes me dizzy, and at night, when the aurora lights up the sky in strange geometric patterns I've never seen before, I swear I can hear something that sounds like singing coming from deep in the forest. I should radio for help. That would be the smart thing to do, but every time I reach for the radio, I stop myself, because what would I say that I think the trees are alive in ways they shouldn't be? That they're watching me? That they're moving? They'd think I was crazy, just like my colleagues at the university did when I tried to tell them about my theories on plant consciousness. But this is different. This is real. And as I sit here writing this, watching the last light fade from the sky, I can see them. The ancient pines outside my window, their branches swaying without any wind. Their bark looks different in the growing darkness. If I stare too long, the patterns start to look like faces. I know I should leave, but I can't. Not yet. Because despite the fear growing in my gut, I'm finally going to prove what I've suspected all along. These trees are more than just trees. I just hope I live long enough to tell someone about it. I guess if you're reading this, you should know more about me and how I ended up in this mess. Most people think forest rangers just walk around making sure nobody starts fires or litters, but I'm different. I'm a scientist, a botanist to be exact. That means I study plants, but my real passion has always been trees. I used to be a professor at a big university, had my own lab, taught students, the whole deal. But that was before everything fell apart. See, I had this crazy idea. or at least everyone thought it was crazy. I believed trees could talk to each other, not with words like we do, but through different ways, like sending chemical signals through their roots or using networks of tiny fungi underground to share information. I spent years studying this. I created special equipment that could measure the tiny electrical signals that trees send to each other. At first, my findings were amazing. I proved that when one tree was hurt by insects, it would warn the others. The other trees would then start making chemicals to protect themselves. It was like they had their own warning system. But then I found something that scared me. In some of the oldest forests, the signals were different, stronger, more complex. It was like finding out that what you thought was a simple conversation was actually an entire hidden language. The older the trees, the more complex these signals became. When I tried to tell my fellow scientists about this, they laughed, called me tree whisperer behind my back, said I was seeing things that weren't there. The university made it clear. Either I stopped this line of research or I had to leave, so I left. The Forest Service job was supposed to be my fresh start. When they offered me this posting in the Superior National Forest, studying some of the oldest pine stands in North America, it felt perfect. Finally, a chance to prove I was right all along. The research station they gave me is small, but has everything I need. My equipment fills most of the space. Machines that measure electrical activity in plants, devices that record the chemical changes in the soil, and my pride and joy, a custom-built system that can track the patterns of how trees share resources through their root networks. That first month here was peaceful, quiet. I'd spend my days taking measurements, collecting samples, and at night I'd sit by my window watching the northern lights dance across the sky while working on my research. Notes. The isolation didn't bother me. I was used to people thinking I was strange anyway, but then the readings started changing. At first, it was subtle. The electrical signals between the trees were getting stronger, especially at night. The patterns were becoming more organized, more intentional. It reminded me of brainwave patterns I'd once seen in a medical textbook. I told myself it was just my equipment acting up because of the cold. Had to be, but deep down, I knew better. These readings, they were exactly what I'd been looking for all those years. Proof that trees could think, communicate, maybe even know. I'm still a scientist. I need to stick to facts. But the facts are getting harder to explain. Yesterday, I found my sample tags had been moved. These are metal markers I put on specific trees to track them. They weren't just knocked off. They had been carefully placed on completely different trees, ones I hadn't tagged before. Trees that were much, much older. The strangest part, the new trees formed a perfect circle around my cabin. I should be excited. This could be the evidence I've been looking for my whole career. But instead, I feel like I'm being watched. Like I'm not the one doing the research anymore. Like I'm the one being studied. This morning, I saw something that made my blood run cold. I was doing my usual walk through the forest, checking my equipment, when I came across one of the oldest in pines in my study area. Something about it looked wrong. I took a few steps closer, and that's when I realized what I was seeing. The tree's roots were exposed, sticking out of the ground like giant fingers. But that wasn't the scary part. The scary part was that there was no dirt around the roots, no sign of erosion or wind damage. It was like the tree had pulled its own roots out of the ground, and it wasn't just that one tree. As I looked around, I noticed others, all of them ancient pines, with their roots partly lifted from the soil. They formed a kind of path, leading deeper into the forest. I should mention something else that's been happening. The snow around certain groups of trees has been melting in perfect circles, even though it's well below freezing. I've checked the temperature of these spots with my thermometer. They're actually colder than the surrounding area, which makes no sense at all. The snow shouldn't be melting, but it is. The animals are acting strange too. Yesterday I saw a group of deer standing in a circle around one of the older groves. They weren't moving, weren't eating, just standing there, staring at the trees. When I got closer, they didn't run away like deer usually do. They slowly walked away, but kept looking back over their shoulders like they were watching something. The smell of pine is getting stronger. Some days it's so powerful it gives me a headache, but it's not a normal pine smell anymore. It's somehow darker, earthier, like wet soil mixed with something I can't quite place. It gets stronger near certain trees, always the oldest ones. My equipment is picking up weird readings too. The machines that measure electrical activity in the trees are showing signals that are off the charts. It's like the trees are buzzing with energy, especially at night. Sometimes the readings are so strong they overload my devices. But the creepiest thing happened last night. I was checking the data on my computer when I heard something that sounded like singing. It was very low, almost too low to hear, more like feeling the vibration in your chest than actual sound. I grabbed my audio recorder and went outside. The recording I got, I've played it back a dozen times now. It sounds like voices, but not human voices. It's like the wind making music through hollow logs, but with a pattern to it, a purpose, and it was definitely coming from the trees. Found something else today, something that makes me wish I had never taken this job. I was mapping out the strange patterns I'd noticed in the forest when I spotted something white sticking out from between some tree roots. At first I thought it was just old snow, or maybe some trash that someone had left behind. It was a bone, a human bone. When I looked closer, I found more. They were old, some of them partially grown over with tree roots. The roots hadn't just grown around the bones. They had grown through them like they were absorbing them. I should radio for help. I know I should. But every time I try, the radio just gives off static. The static sounds almost like that singing I heard in the forest. The sun is setting now and I'm back in my cabin writing this. The temperature has dropped and fog is forming around the oldest part of the forest. That's not normal. Fog shouldn't form in just one specific area. But there it is, swirling around those ancient trees like a living thing. From my window I can see the grove where I found the bones. The branches are moving, even though there's no wind tonight. And I swear the trees look different in the fog, taller, broader. The patterns in their bark seem to shift when I'm not looking directly at them. Something is very wrong in this forest. These trees, they're not just communicating anymore. They're hunting, and I think they know I know. I couldn't sleep last night. How could I after what I found? Those bones kept haunting my thoughts. This morning, I decided to do something that scared me. I went back to look closer at where I found them. I wish I hadn't. There wasn't just one set of bones. As I carefully moved aside some fallen pine needles, I found more, many more. Some looked really old, turning brown and crumbly. Others seemed newer, and they were all wrapped up in tree roots like the trees had grabbed them and never let go. But here's the thing that really shook me. I found a backpack. It was half buried in pine needles and partly grown through with roots, but I could still open it. Inside there was an old notebook, a ranger's journal from 1947. My hands were shaking as I read it. The pages were yellow and some parts were hard to read, but what I could make out made my stomach turn. The ranger who wrote it, James Miller, had noticed the same things I have. Trees moving, strange patterns in the snow, that weird singing. Sound at night, his last entry gives me chills. He wrote, "The trees hunt at night. They're not what we think they are. They remember the old ones buried here. They've learned from them, growing over them, becoming something else." If you're reading this, stay away from the old grove. They don't like being studied. They study US. After that, nothing. Just blank pages. I did some digging through the old station records after that. Turns out Ranger Miller wasn't the only one who disappeared here. Every few years, someone would go missing in this part of the forest. Hikers, researchers, rangers. The official reports always blamed it on the weather, or bears, or people getting lost. But there's something else. I found really old letters from when they first built this ranger station. The local Native American tribes warned them not to build here. They said this place was sacred, but not in a good way. They said the trees here were different, that they remembered the dead. I understand now why they said that. When I look at these trees through my camera, I see things I can't explain. In the photos, the branches make patterns that look like writing. Not English or any language I know, but definitely patterns. And they only show up around the spots where I found the bones. The weirdest part, I took pictures of the same trees at different times and the patterns changed, like they were trying to say different things. My equipment is picking up even stranger. Readings now. The electrical signals between the trees spike every night around midnight, and they're strongest in a circle around my cabin. Sometimes my machines pick up signals that look almost like brain waves, like the trees are thinking, planning. This afternoon, something happened that nearly made me run for my snowmobile. I was checking my cameras when I heard a crash from the old grove. When I got there, I found one of my recording devices smashed to pieces. But it wasn't just broken. The pieces were arranged in a perfect circle, and all around it the snow had melted in that same circular pattern I've been seeing. The trees above it had changed too. Their branches were all pointing down at the broken machine, like fingers pointing at something they didn't like. I'm writing this now from my cabin. The sun is setting again, and the fog is rolling in, but tonight it's different. The fog is forming shapes. When I look directly at them, they disappear. But from the corner of my eye, I swear I can see them. Figures walking between the trees, tall, thin figures that look like they're made of bark and branches. The singing has started again too. It's louder tonight. And now I understand what Ranger Miller meant in his journal. It doesn't sound like singing anymore. It sounds like words. Ancient words in a language that no human was meant to hear. My radio is dead now, just static. But in the static, I hear that same sound, those same words. The trees aren't just communicating, they're not just hunting, they're waking up. And I think they've been waiting for someone like me. Someone who could understand them, someone who could hear them. I should leave. Every logical part of my brain is screaming at me to get out of here, but I can't. Not yet. Because under the fear, there's something else. They're trying to tell me something. And God help me, I need to know what it is. I think I finally understand what's happening here. I wish I didn't. God, I wish I didn't. It started this morning. I was looking at the data from my machines again, trying to make sense of the strange patterns I've been seeing. That's when I noticed something I should have seen before. The electrical signals from the trees weren't random at all. They made a pattern, like a web or a network, with the oldest trees at the center, but it wasn't just any pattern. It looked exactly like a brain. I've seen pictures of brain scans before, how different parts light up when a person is thinking or feeling something. The pattern my machines picked up from the forest looked just like that. The ancient pines were like the center of the brain, and all the younger trees were connected to them, like branches of nerves spreading out through the forest. I had to know more. Even though every part of me was screaming to run, I grabbed my equipment and went out to the old grove. The fog was still there, swirling around the bases of the trees. The smell of pine was so strong it made my eyes water. That's when something strange happened with my equipment. The screen started showing numbers I'd never seen before. The electrical activity was off the charts, but it wasn't coming from just one tree. It was moving between them, through the ground, through the air, like thoughts passing through a mind. I took some soil samples, right where the roots of the oldest trees meet underground. Under my microscope, I saw something impossible. The fungi that usually connect tree roots, we call it mycelium, wasn't acting normal. It was growing, changing shape as I watched, making patterns, like it was trying to write something. Then I remembered something from the old ranger's journal about the trees, remembering the old ones buried here. I started digging through the station's historical records again, going back as far as I could. What I found made my blood run cold. This forest grows on top of an ancient burial ground, not just any burial ground, a sacred place where tribal elders and medicine people were buried. People who were said to be powerful, who could talk to the spirit world. They were buried here hundreds, maybe thousands of years ago. The trees grew over them. Their roots grew through them. And somehow, over all those years, they absorbed something, knowledge, consciousness, maybe even memories. But it gets worse. Those missing people I found records of, they didn't just disappear. According to my readings, they became part of it. Every time the forest took someone, the electrical patterns got more complex, more human-like. The forest isn't just alive. It's learning, growing, becoming more aware with each person it takes. As I write this, I can hear movement outside my cabin, not wind in the branches, actual movement. The trees closest to my cabin have pulled their roots up. They've moved several feet closer since this morning. They're not even trying to hide it anymore. The singing has changed too. It doesn't sound like nonsense anymore. I can almost make out words, almost understand what they're saying. Part of me wants to listen harder, to finally understand. But another part knows that if I do, I might never stop listening. My machines are going crazy now. The patterns are changing, growing stronger. The forest is excited, active, like it knows I've figured it out. I just looked out my window and saw something that made me drop my pen. The bark on the nearest tree. It's changed. The patterns look like a face now. Not just kind of like a face, an actual human face. I recognize it from the old photos in the station records. It's Ranger. Miller, the forest didn't just take these people, it kept them, made them part of itself, and now I think it wants to add me to its collection. I've tried calling for help on the radio again, but all I get is that strange singing. Even when I turn the radio off, I can still hear it. It's in my head now, getting louder, starting to make sense. They're telling me their story, showing me what they've learned over the centuries, promising to share all their knowledge with me. Part of me is still a scientist, still wants to understand, to document, to prove I was right all along about trees being conscious. But the other part of me remembers those bones, those faces in the bark, the way the forest has been slowly surrounding my cabin, cutting off all escape routes. I think I've learned too much, understood too much. And the forest, it doesn't like being understood. It's happening. Everything I was afraid of, it's all happening right now. An hour ago, I heard someone knocking on my cabin door. 3 slow knocks that made the whole cabin shake. But when I looked through the window, there was nobody there, just a pine branch tapping against the door. A branch that hadn't been there before. I'm not alone here anymore. Tim, one of the forest technicians, arrived by snowmobile this afternoon for his monthly check-in. I tried to warn him, tried to tell him we needed to leave right away, but he just laughed and said I'd been alone too long. Trees moving? Come on, Dr. Halverson, he said. Maybe you need a vacation. He went out to check some equipment near the old grove. I begged him not to go, but he wouldn't listen. That was 20 minutes ago. 10 minutes ago, I heard him scream. I ran outside with my flashlight. The sun had just set, and that strange fog was rolling in again. I could barely see 10 feet in front of me. I kept calling Tim's name, following his footprints in the snow. The footprints led straight to the old grove, but they didn't come out. What I saw there, I don't want to write it down, but I have to. People need to know what happened. Tim was there, in the middle of the grove, but he wasn't alone. The roots, those massive ancient roots, they were moving, growing, wrapping around his legs like giant snakes. He was still conscious, still screaming for help. I tried to reach him. I really tried. But the trees, they wouldn't let me. Every time I got close, branches would swing down, blocking my path. Not like they were being blown by the wind, like they were reaching for me. The fog got thicker, and that pine smell became so strong I could barely breathe. The singing started again, but this time it wasn't just in my head. It was coming from everywhere, from the trees, from the ground, from the air itself. And Tim, he started changing. I saw it happening. The roots weren't just holding him anymore. They were growing into him, through him. His skin started looking like bark. His fingers stretched out like branches. The last thing he said before he changed was, "They're in my head. I can hear them. I can hear all of them." Then he was gone. Just gone. Where he had been standing, there was only a new tree. A perfect young pine tree that hadn't been there before. Its bark already had patterns that looked like a face. Tim's face. I ran back to my cabin. Locked the door. Not that it matters. They're everywhere now. The trees have completely surrounded my cabin. I can hear their roots moving under the floorboards, feel them testing the foundation. My machines are going crazy. The electrical readings are stronger than ever, but now I understand why. Each of those electrical patterns, they're not just signals, they're people. Everyone the forest has taken, their memories, their thoughts, their consciousness. They're all still here, trapped in the trees, awake, aware, part of something bigger, something hungrier. The forest is trying to talk to me now, not with that singing anymore, with real words, words that appear in my mind, made of memories that aren't mine. They're showing me things, terrible, wonderful things. They're showing me how it feels to be part of them, how it feels when your consciousness spreads through roots and branches, when you can feel every raindrop, every breeze, every beam of sunlight. They're showing me what it's like to live for centuries, to grow slowly, but never die. They want me to join them, to add my knowledge, my understanding of them, to their collective mind. The branches are tapping on my windows now, not randomly. They're tapping out words in Morse code. Over and over, join us, join us, join us. My head feels strange, heavy. That pine smell is everywhere. Even inside the cabin. The fog is seeping in through every crack, and in it I see faces. So many faces. Some I recognize from the missing persons reports. Some are much, much older. They're all smiling. I need to think, need to figure out a way out of this, but it's getting harder to focus, harder to remember why I wanted to leave in the first place. The forest's thoughts keep mixing with mine. Maybe it wouldn't be so bad to be part of something so ancient, so powerful, to finally understand everything I've spent my life studying. No, I can't think like that. That's them getting in my head. I have to fight it, have to stay myself. But the windows are cracking now, the door is creaking, and the roots under the floor are getting louder. I don't have much time left. I'm running out of time, but I think I've found something. A way to fight back. My hands are shaking as I write this. The forest is in my head now. I keep seeing flashes of memories that aren't mine. People from long ago walking through these woods. The first settlers cutting down trees. The Native Americans burying their dead. All their memories stored in the forest like pictures in a photo album. But those memories showed me something important. 2 hours ago, I was almost ready to give up. The trees had cracked all my windows. Roots were pushing up through the floor. That fog was everywhere, making it hard to think straight. The singing in my head was so loud I could barely hear myself think. Then I remembered something. Something. From those memories the forest showed me. The Native Americans used to burn special herbs when they came here. Not to hurt the forest, but to keep it away from their minds, to stay safe from its hunger. I started searching through my cabin like crazy. I knew I had something similar in my research supplies, chemicals I used to kill harmful fungi that attack trees. The forest uses fungi to connect all its trees together, to share thoughts and memories. What if I could break those connections? I found the fungicide in my lab cabinet. The forest must have known what I was thinking because Then a huge root burst through my floor, knocking the bottle from my hand. But I grabbed it before it could break. My hands were trembling as I mixed the chemical with water in my plant sprayer. The forest was really attacking now. Branches smashed through every window, roots grabbed at my legs. That pine smell was so strong I could barely breathe, but the fungicide worked. When I sprayed it around me, the roots pulled back like they'd been burned. The fog cleared a little. The singing in my head got quieter. For the first time since this started, I can think clearly again. And I understand now what this place really is. It's not just a forest that became conscious. It's more like a giant net with all the trees connected underground by fungi. The oldest trees are like the brain, storing memories and controlling everything. When they take someone, that person's memories and thoughts get stored in the ancient trees, trapped forever, in the forest's mind. But the fungicide weakens those connections. It's like cutting the forest's nerves, making it harder for it to think, harder for it to control things. I've made a discovery about the forest's power too. It's strongest at night, when the aurora lights dance in the sky. Something about that. Light charges it up, makes it more powerful. And tonight the aurora is supposed to be the strongest it's been in years. The forest knows I figured this out. It's getting desperate, angry. The attacks are getting worse. Just now, a branch shot through my wall like a spear, missing my head by inches. I can hear trees uprooting themselves outside, moving closer to my cabin. The whole building is shaking. The faces in the bark are changing too. They don't look peaceful anymore. They look hungry. Even Tim's face in that new tree looks twisted, now angry. They know I'm trying to escape their trap. My brain feels like it's splitting in two. Part of me still wants to join them. That part keeps showing me beautiful things, how it feels to live forever, to be part of something so ancient and powerful. The forest is promising to make me immortal, to let me learn all its secrets. But the other part of me remembers those bones, remembers how Tim screamed, remembers all those missing people who never had a chance to choose. I've barricaded myself in my lab now. It's the only room with a concrete floor where the roots can't break through easily. I've sprayed fungicide everywhere, making a safe circle around me, but I only have one bottle left. The forest is trying a new trick. It's making the branches scrape against the walls in patterns that sound like words. You wanted to understand us. You wanted proof. We can give you everything you ever wanted to know. They're right. This is everything I tried to prove about Tree. In consciousness, I could be the one who finally shows the world the truth, but not like this, not by becoming another face in the bark. I have a plan, a desperate one. The lake is about 100 yards from my cabin. If I can reach it, maybe I can escape across the ice. The trees can't follow me there. Their roots can't grow through ice. But to reach the lake, I'll have to run through the heart of the forest, past all the ancient trees, past Tim, past all those hungry faces in the bark. The aurora lights are starting to glow in the sky. The forest is getting stronger. Soon it'll be strong enough to break through. My last defenses. I have to try to escape now before it's too late. If anyone finds this journal, stay away from the ancient pines. Don't try to study them. Don't try to understand them. Just run. I'm writing this from inside a hollow log near the lake's edge. My hands won't stop shaking. I can barely hold the pen. But I need to write down what just happened. In case I don't make it, someone needs to know. I made my run for it about an hour ago. I'd filled my pockets with what was left of the fungicide and wrapped my journal in plastic to keep it safe. The aurora lights were filling the sky with strange green patterns, making the snow glow. The forest was stronger than ever. The moment I stepped out of my lab, everything went crazy. The trees, they didn't just move. They ran, their roots ripped right out of the ground, and they came at me like giant walking monsters. Their branches reached for me like hundreds of hands, sprayed the fungicide in a wide arc around me. The trees it hit shuddered and pulled back, but there were so many of them. Too many. I ran as fast as I could through the snow. The forest was alive all around me. Trees that had stood in the same spots for hundreds of years were walking, running, chasing me. Their roots left deep tracks in the snow. Branches whipped at my face. That awful singing was so loud, it felt like my head would burst. Then I saw Tim's tree. It pulled itself right out of the ground and stood in my path. The face in its bark wasn't just a pattern anymore. It was really Tim's face, pushing out of the wood like a mask. His mouth opened, and he spoke in a voice made of creaking wood. "Join us, Daniel. It doesn't hurt. It's beautiful here." But behind his words I could hear him screaming. I ducked under his reaching branches and kept running. The fungicide was running out. My lungs were burning from the freezing air and that overwhelming pine smell. The forest was herding me, trying to drive me back toward the old grove. That's when I tripped. I fell face first into the snow, and before I could get up, the roots had me. They wrapped around my legs, my arms, my chest, started pulling me backward. The bark of the nearest tree split open like a mouth, ready to swallow me whole. But they made a mistake. They pulled me right past my research equipment, the stuff I used to measure electrical signals in trees. And seeing those machines gave me an idea. Trees might be able to think now, might be able to move, but they're still trees. They still follow the rules of nature. They need water and nutrients to move, to think, to live, and all that water in their cells. It freezes. I grabbed my equipment and ripped out the wires. The forest didn't understand what I was doing until it was too late. I jammed the wires into the nearest root and turned the power on full. The electrical current shot through the root system. In the freezing cold, the water inside the trees crystallized instantly. The roots holding me cracked and broke like glass. The forest screamed. Not just with one voice, but with hundreds. Every face in every tree was screaming as the freezing. Shock spread through their connected roots. I ran, harder than I've ever run in my life. The trees were still coming, but slower now, confused. Hurting. I could see the lake ahead, just 100 feet, 50, 20. Something caught my shoulder. A branch, sharp as a spear, pierced right through me. The pain was awful, but I was so close. I stumbled onto the ice, fell, crawled. Behind me, I could hear the forest's rage. The trees had reached the shore, but they couldn't follow me onto the frozen lake. Their roots couldn't break through the thick ice, but they had one last trick to try. The ancient pines at the shore bent together, pointing at me like arrows. And suddenly, all that knowledge, all those memories they'd collected over centuries, flooded into my mind at once. It was beautiful, terrible, overwhelming. Everything they'd learned, everything they'd seen, all trying to cram itself into my head at once. For a moment, I almost turned back. Almost walked right into their waiting branches. The memories were so beautiful, so tempting. Then I remembered Tim's face, remembered the bones, remembered the screaming I'd heard, hidden behind their sweet songs. I crawled on. The further I got from shore, the quieter their voices became. The memories faded. By the time I reached this hollow log at the far shore, I could think clearly again. But I'm not safe yet. Night is falling, the aurora is getting brighter, and I can see the trees moving along both shores of the lake, following me, waiting. They know I have to come off the ice eventually. The nearest town is 40 miles away. In this cold, with my injured shoulder, I don't know if I can make it, but I have to try. The forest is patient. It's waited centuries to be discovered. It can wait a little longer. I'm going to make a run for it soon. Head east through the woods. The trees are thinner there, younger, maybe too young to be part of the forest's consciousness. At least, that's what I hope. The sun has almost set. The aurora lights are painting the sky in ribbons of green and purple. Beautiful, but now I know their light is feeding the forest, making it stronger. This might be my last entry. If anyone finds this journal, remember, the trees are awake, they're hungry, and they're spreading. Official report, Superior National Forest Incident Investigation date, March 15th, 1992 status. Glassified, 3 months have passed since Dr. Daniel Halverson was found half frozen in the snow, 40 miles from his research station. The search team almost missed him. He was huddled under a fallen log, clutching a plastic-wrapped journal to his chest. His shoulder was badly injured, and he kept mumbling about the trees coming. The doctors said he was lucky to survive. Hypothermia, infection, and blood loss nearly killed him. But what happened next was even stranger. When they brought flowers to his hospital room, the plants grew wildly overnight, their stems twisting into strange patterns. They had to remove all plants from his wing of the hospital after several incidents. The doctors can't explain it, but anywhere Halverson goes, plants react to his presence. They grow too fast, too strangely, almost like they're reaching for him. His skin has changed too. Dark patterns have appeared, spreading across his body like tree roots or fungal growth. The patterns match exactly the neural network drawings. In his journal, we found his research station exactly as he described it. The cabin was destroyed, crushed by something massive. Deep tracks in the ground looked like tree roots had ripped themselves up, just as he wrote. But by the time we arrived, all the trees were back in their normal places, roots buried deep, as if they'd never moved at all. The only proof was in the patterns. When we took aerial photographs, the trees formed perfect geometric shapes that couldn't have happened naturally. And in certain areas, the bark of the older pines showed strange markings, patterns that looked eerily like human faces. We never found Tim Carter, the missing forest technician. His snowmobile was there, half buried in snow, but of Tim himself, there was no sign. Just a young pine tree growing in a perfect circle of melted snow, its bark bearing a pattern that looked just like Tim's face. Following Dr. Halverson's notes, we tested the soil around the oldest trees. The fungal networks there were like nothing we'd ever seen before, too complex, too organized, almost like a giant brain spread out through the forest floor. But when we tried to take samples, the fungi would die instantly, as if the forest was protecting its secrets. The local tribes have refused to help with the investigation. Their elders just shake their heads and say, "We warned them. Some places should be left alone. We've closed the area to the public." The official story is that it's for ecological research. Armed guards patrol the perimeter, though they report strange incidents, equipment failures, weird sounds at night, trees that don't appear on their maps. As for Dr. Halverson, he's refused to return to the forest. He's given up botany completely, but he insists we keep watching the area. He says the forest is patient, but it's also growing, spreading the most. Disturbing evidence came last week. Our satellite images showed something impossible. The ancient grove is expanding. Young trees are growing in perfect geometric patterns, spreading outward like a giant web. And at night, when the aurora lights are strong, we've recorded electrical signals passing through the forest that match the patterns of human brainwaves. We found old records going back hundreds of years. Stories of missing people, strange sounds. In the night, trees that moved when no one was watching. The forest has been doing this for centuries, slowly growing, learning, getting stronger. Dr. Halverson was right about one more thing. In his journal, he wrote that the forest was just beginning to wake up, that it was spreading beyond its original grove. Yesterday, rangers reported similar patterns appearing in forests over 100 miles away. Perfect circles of melted snow around old trees, strange electrical readings. And at night, when the aurora lights dance in the sky, they say they can hear singing coming from the woods. The ancient pines aren't just awake anymore. They're hungry, and they're on the move. End report. Found scrawled on the back of the last page. I can still hear them in my dreams, still feel them calling me. The patterns on my skin grow larger every day. Sometimes when I'm alone, I catch myself swaying like a tree in the wind. They're patient. They can wait. But sooner or later, they'll find me again, And next time I might not be strong enough to run, Daniel Halverson. The morning my life changed forever started with a silence that shouldn't have been there. I've spent enough years in these woods to know when something isn't right. And that morning, everything was wrong. I remember standing on my cabin's porch, coffee mug warming my hands against the bitter cold of that autumn morning in 1958. The fog was thick, clinging to the pine trees like ghost fingers. Something about it made my old war injuries ache more than usual. My name's Bobby Erickson, and I'm a ranger here in the boundary waters of Minnesota, or at least I was. This is the story of what happened to me out there, though most folks still don't believe it. I don't blame them. I wouldn't believe it either if I hadn't lived through it. That morning started peaceful enough. The frost had made pretty patterns on the fallen leaves, like nature's own lace doilies. The lakes were starting to freeze around the edges, thin sheets of ice crackling when ducks landed on them. We were miles from anywhere. The nearest town was a good 50 miles south, and the only other people around were the crews manning the radar stations, watching for Russian planes that never came. I was admiring how the early sunlight turned the fog into bands of gold when I noticed the first wrong thing. The birds had been singing their morning songs, like they always did, when suddenly they all stopped, mid-song, like someone had flipped a switch. In all my years as a ranger, I'd never heard anything like it. Even during storms, birds don't just stop like that. They flutter, they call warnings, they make some kind of noise, but this was different. Then I heard it, the sound of branches breaking in the distance. Big branches. The kind of sound that means something heavy is moving through the forest, but it wasn't the right sound for a bear or a moose. The crashes were too high up, like whatever was breaking those branches was much taller than any animal that should be in these woods. I set my coffee down and reached for my binoculars. The fog was doing strange things that morning, moving against the wind, swirling in ways fog shouldn't move. As I watched, the mist seemed to gather itself into shapes that looked almost human but stretched too tall, too thin. Then they'd fall apart like smoke in the wind. My hand went to the silver compass in my pocket, my brother Tommy's compass. It hasn't pointed true north since the day he died in Korea, but I keep it with me always. Some habits you just can't break even when you know they don't make sense anymore. I should have called it in right then, should have radioed for backup. But the radio had been acting up for days because of some kind of atmospheric disturbance. And besides, I was too proud, too stubborn. That was always my problem, thinking I could handle everything on my own. Tommy used to tell me that would get me killed one day. Standing there on my porch, watching that wrong fog and listening to that wrong silence, I had no idea how right he'd been. The sun was rising higher now, but somehow it felt darker, colder, the kind of cold that seeps into your bones and makes old wounds ache. I went inside to grab my gear. Whatever was out there in my forest, I was going to find it. I didn't know then that it would find me first. I've never told anyone the real reason why I came to work in these woods. Most folks think it's because I'm good at tracking, and I am. There's not a lost hiker I couldn't find given enough time, but that's not why I'm here. The truth is, I came here to hide. From memories mostly, from the things I saw in Korea, and from what happened to Tommy. As I packed my gear that morning, flashlight, first aid kit, extra layers, I caught my reflection in the window. Same weathered face I've had since the war, same crow's feet around. My eyes from squinting into the distance. My leg was acting up again, the old injury making me limp more than usual. The cold never helps. Tommy used to tease me about my limp. "You walk like an old man, Bobby," he'd say, grinning. "But at least you're a tough old man." He was always like that, making jokes to cheer people up. Even followed me into the army, saying somebody had to keep an eye on his big brother. I should have stopped him. The memories hit harder than usual that morning as I checked my gear. Maybe it was the weird fog or the unnatural quiet. But I kept thinking about that last day in Korea. Our unit was tracking enemy movements through mountains not so different from these woods. I was leading the way. I was always leading the way. Tommy was right behind me. I should have seen the signs. Should have noticed it was too quiet just like this morning. But I didn't, and we walked right into an ambush. Tommy didn't make it out. The compass in my pocket was his. He'd just gotten it that week, all excited about using it on patrol. After it happened, they gave it to me with his other things. It hasn't pointed north since that day. Just spins and spins like it's looking for something it can't find. Kind of like me, I guess. That's why I took this job way out here after my breakdown at the last ranger station. Too many people there, too many questions. Out here it's just me and the wilderness. Well, me and the old Ojibwe stories I've been reading about. See, when I first arrived, I met an Ojibwe elder in town who noticed my limp. He said some wounds go deeper than bone, and some spirits are drawn to that kind of pain. I didn't think much of it then, just nodded politely and took the books he offered about forest spirits and ancient legends. Now those books are piled on my bedside table, dog-eared and worn. Maybe I should have read them more carefully. I stuffed an extra sweater in my pack. The temperature was dropping fast for this time of year, and strapped on my holster. Standard ranger gear, though I've never had to use it on anything bigger than a snake. As I stepped off my porch, that weird fog swirled around my boots. The silence felt heavier now, pressing against my ears like I was deep underwater. Even my footsteps seemed muffled. Then I heard it again, branches snapping in the distance, but higher up than any animal should be. And something else. A whisper, so faint I almost missed it. It sounded like Tommy's voice. My hand tightened on the strap of my pack. Logic said it couldn't be him, just the wind playing tricks, or my mind mixing up memories with morning mist. But logic felt pretty far away just then, with that fog curling around me like pale fingers and that impossible voice floating through the trees. I started walking toward the sound. I had to know what was out there. I should have run the other way. The first thing I noticed was the tracks. I've been tracking animals and people through these woods for years now. I know what deer prints look like, bear prints, even moose. But these were different. They looked almost human, like someone walking barefoot through the forest. But they were huge, twice the size of my boot, and each footprint had 6 toes. I crouched down to look closer, my bad leg protesting. The prints were fresh, the dirt still damp where whatever made them had passed. As I studied them, I realized something else was wrong. There were no other tracks anywhere. No rabbit prints, no deer trails, not even bird tracks in the mud. It was like every animal in the forest had just disappeared. That's when I smelled it. A weird, sharp smell like ammonia mixed with rotting leaves. It made my eyes water. The smell got stronger as I followed the tracks. After about an hour of walking, I came across Jim Harper's hunting cabin. Jim was an old friend who came up here every autumn. His truck was parked outside, covered in frost despite the early hour. "Jim," I called out but got no answer. The cabin door was open, swinging slightly in the breeze. Inside, everything looked normal at first. Then I noticed the details that made my skin crawl. There was a coffee pot still warm on the stove. 2 plates of half-eaten breakfast sat on the table, the eggs congealed but not yet dry. The fireplace still had glowing embers. Someone had been here very recently, but there was no sign of Jim or whoever had been with him. I pulled out Tommy's compass, more out of habit than anything else. The needle started spinning wildly, whirling around faster than I'd ever seen it move. A chill ran down my spine that had nothing to do with the cold. Back outside, I found my horse, Scout, where I'd left him tied to a tree. He was usually the calmest horse in the ranger service, but now he was stomping and snorting, rolling his eyes like he does during thunderstorms. When I tried to mount up, he wouldn't budge. Just kept backing away, ears flat against his head. That's when I saw the marks on the trees. They looked like claw marks, but they were wrong. Too high up, starting 12, maybe 15 feet off the ground. The bark was ripped away in long, deep gouges that couldn't have been made by any bear. The fog was getting thicker now, even though it was nearly noon. It should have been burning off, but instead it was getting darker, like twilight coming hours too early. The temperature was dropping so fast I could see my breath getting thicker in the air. "Bobby," I spun around so fast I almost fell. That voice? It was Tommy's voice, clear as day, coming from somewhere in the trees, but it wasn't just from one direction. It seemed to be coming from everywhere at once. "Bobby, help me." My hands were shaking as I pulled out my flashlight. The beam seemed weak in the thickening darkness. As I swept it across the trees, something caught my eye. A glint of metal under a bush. It was a camera, one of those expensive ones tourists bring up here to take pictures of wildlife. I picked it up, turned it over in my hands. The strap was torn, like it had been ripped off someone's neck. The camera was one of those new kinds that develops pictures right away. There were photos still stuck in the slot. My fingers felt numb as I pulled them out. The first few shots were normal, just trees and lakes. Then I got to the last photo. My blood turned to ice. There, at the edge of the frame between the trees, something was standing. Something tall, impossibly tall and thin as a dead tree. The photo was blurry, like whoever took it was shaking. But I could make out what looked like a deer's skull where its head should be, and eyes, yellow eyes, that seemed to glow even in the photograph. The temperature dropped another 10 degrees. In the distance, something cracked, another tree branch breaking way too high up, and then I heard Tommy's voice again, closer this time, calling my name from the deepening shadows. I knew I should head back. Everything in me was screaming to get out of there. But I couldn't, not with Jim possibly missing, and that voice that sounded so much like my brother. I clicked on my flashlight and stepped deeper into the darkening forest. Behind me, Scout whinnied in fear, and the fog swallowed up the sound like it had never been. I'd like to say I was brave as I walked deeper into those dark woods. But truth is, I was terrified. Every snap of a twig made me jump. Every whisper of wind sounded like Tommy's voice calling me. The fog was so thick now I could barely see 20 feet ahead. My flashlight beam just bounced back at me like shining it through milk. The cold had gotten worse too. Not the normal kind of cold. We get up here, but something different. It felt like the cold was alive, following me, hunting me. That's when I saw it. Just a glimpse out of the corner of my eye. Something moved between the trees. Something tall, so tall it had to bend down to pass under branches that were 15 feet up. I swung my flashlight toward it, but it was gone, but not before I saw its shape, like a person, but wrong. All stretched out, like a shadow getting long at sunset. And thin, thinner than anyone could be and still be alive. "Bobby, please," Tommy's voice again, this time from behind me. I spun around, and for a second, just a second, I saw him, standing there in his army uniform, looking just like the last day I saw him alive. "Tommy!" My voice cracked. Deep down, I knew it couldn't be him, but seeing him there, he smiled at me, held out his hand. "I've been waiting for you, big brother." I took a step toward him before I could stop myself. Then I noticed something odd. There was frost forming on the ground where he stood, spreading out from his feet like a spider web made of ice. I blinked, and he was gone. But something else was there, something that made my heart stop. Yellow eyes, glowing like candlelight, but cold. They were set in what looked like a deer's skull, but bigger than any deer I'd ever seen. The thing it was attached to, I still have trouble describing it. It was like someone had taken a human body and stretched it like taffy. Arms too long, fingers like twigs, skin pulled tight over bones that stuck out in all the wrong places. It had to be at least 12 feet tall. The smell hit me then, that same ammonia smell from before, but stronger. Strong enough to make my eyes water. I stumbled backward, nearly falling. My flashlight beam caught it full on, and I saw, God help me, I saw what was hanging from its belt. torn pieces of clothing, a watch I recognized as Jim's, and other things I don't want to describe. It moved toward me, not walking exactly, more like sliding. Frost spread across the ground with each step it took. The air got so cold, it hurt to breathe. "Bobby," it said in Tommy's voice, but wrong now, like his voice was being played backwards. "Don't you want to see your brother again?" I ran. I'm not ashamed to admit it. I ran as fast as my bad leg would let me. Branches whipped at my face, roots tried to trip me, but I kept going. Behind me, I heard it moving through the trees, breaking. Branches high above my head. I don't know how long I ran. Felt like hours. My leg was screaming, my lungs were on fire from the cold air. Finally, I had to stop, leaning against a tree to catch my breath. That's when I heard someone crying. It was coming from up ahead, a human sound, a real one this time. Not like the thing's imitation of Tommy. Someone was out there in the woods with that monster. I knew I should try to get back to my cabin, call for help if the radio was working. But I couldn't leave someone out there. Not with that thing. Hunting them, the crying got louder, sounded young, scared. Taking a deep breath, I pulled out my flashlight again and headed toward the sound. The fog swirled around me, and somewhere behind me, I heard branches breaking. The thing was still following me, still hunting, and now I was walking deeper into its territory. Following the sound of crying, I pushed through the fog that seemed to get thicker with every step. My leg was killing me, but I couldn't stop. Not now. That's when I found her. A young woman huddled against a fallen tree, shivering, so hard her teeth were chattering. She looked up as my flashlight beam hit her, and I saw pure terror in her eyes. "Are you real?" she whispered. It keeps showing me people who aren't really there." "I'm real," I said, kneeling down beside her. "I'm Ranger Erickson." "What's your name?" "Sarah," she said. "Sarah Mitchell. I was hiking with my brother Mark, but we got separated when that thing..." She started crying again. I gave her my spare jacket. She was dangerously cold. "It looked like Mark," she said, called to me in his voice. But when I got close, she shuddered. "Its face, those eyes. We need to move," I told her. "Can you walk?" She nodded, but as she tried to stand, her legs gave out. I caught her before she fell. That's when I noticed the frost forming on the ground around us. "Bobby," Tommy's voice again from somewhere in the darkness. "Why did you let me die, Bobby?" Sarah grabbed my arm. "Don't listen. That's what it does. It gets in your head, makes you hear things." She was right. I knew she was right, but knowing something and feeling it are two different things, because there was Tommy again, standing just at the edge of my flashlight beam, looking sad, looking real. "You could have saved me," he said. "You can still save me." The cold was getting worse. I could see Sarah's breath coming in thick white clouds. She pressed closer to me, trembling. "We have to run," I whispered. "When I say now, run straight that way." I pointed my flashlight toward what I hoped was south. "There's an old fire tower about half a mile in that direction. We might make it if..." A branch snapped overhead. Sarah screamed. It was there, right above us. That skull face looking down, those yellow eyes glowing brighter now. Frost spread across the trees around us like spider webs. "Now!" I shouted, pushing Sarah ahead of me. We ran. My bad leg nearly gave out with every step, but fear kept me going. Behind us, I heard it moving through the trees, not running, just gliding, like it knew it would catch us eventually. "Bobby." Now the voice came from in front of us. Tommy, standing there, beckoning. "This way, brother." "Don't look at it." I grabbed Sarah's arm, pulling her in a different direction. "It's not real!" But I looked. God help me. I couldn't help it. And this time, I saw Tommy as he really was at the end, bloody, broken, dying in my arms in those Korean mountains. Stumbled, fell hard. Sarah tried to help me up, but the cold was getting to her. Her movements were slow, clumsy. The thing was closer now. I could smell that rotting ammonia stench, could hear its breathing, a wet, rattling sound like wind through dead leaves. "Why do you run?" it asked in Tommy's voice. "Don't you want to be with your brother?" "You're not him," I said through chattering teeth. "You're not him." It laughed, a horrible sound like ice cracking on the lake. Then it changed. Tommy's image melted away, leaving just that tall, skeletal thing with its deer skull face. "No," it said, its voice now like rocks grinding together, "but I can give you what you want most. I can give you peace, no more guilt, no more pain, just quiet, forever." Part of me, God help me, part of me wanted to give in, to just let the cold take me, to stop running, stop fighting, but then S.A.R screamed again, and I remembered why I became a ranger in the first place. To help people, to save them, like I couldn't save Tommy. Through the fog ahead, I saw it. The old fire tower rising up like a skeleton against the dark sky, our last chance, if we could make it there. But the cold was getting worse, and that thing was getting closer. I could feel its shadow falling over us, reaching for us with those long, twisted fingers. We weren't going to make it. Not both of us. I made my decision in a split second. "S.A.R," I said, pulling out my lighter and pressing it into her hand, "run to the tower, get inside, lock the door, and no matter what you hear, no matter what you see, don't open it until morning. Understand?" "What about you?" Her eyes were wide with fear. "I'll lead it away, give you time." I pushed her toward the tower. "Go, now!" She hesitated for just a moment, then ran. I watched until I saw her reach the tower door, then turned to face the thing that was hunting us. "Hey!" I shouted into the darkness. "You want me? Come and get me." It appeared right in front of me, so close I could smell its breath, like old meat left in the sun. Those yellow eyes stared down at me, and I saw something in them I hadn't noticed before. Hunger. Not just for food, but for pain, for suffering. "Brave Bobby," it said, using Tommy's voice again. "Always trying to save everyone, but you couldn't save me, could you?" "No," I said, backing away slowly. "I couldn't save Tommy, but I can save her." I turned and ran, but not toward the tower. Instead, I headed deeper into the woods, making as much noise as possible. Behind me I heard it following, branches snapping high above as it moved. My plan, if you could call it that, was simple. Lead it away from S.A.R, then try to circle back to the tower. I had an idea, a crazy one, but it was all I had. But the thing was smart, smarter than I'd hoped. It didn't just follow me. It started appearing ahead of me, beside me, everywhere I turned, each time looking like Tommy, each time begging me to stop running. "You're tired, Bobby," it said. "So tired of running, of feeling guilty. I can make it all go away." My leg was giving out. The cold was so intense now I could barely feel my feet. But I kept going, stumbling through the dark, until finally I couldn't run anymore. I collapsed against a tree, gasping for breath. The thing towered over me, frost spreading from its feet to cover the ground around us. "Now," it said, reaching for me with those long, bony fingers, "you can rest." But as it bent down, I saw something that made my heart jump, the fire tower right behind it. I'd run in a circle without realizing it, and I still had my emergency flares. With the last of my strength, I rolled away from its grasp and pulled out a flare. The thing hissed as I lit it, the red light making its yellow eyes glow brighter. "You're right," I said. "I am tired. Tired of being haunted." I threw the flare past it, straight through the tower's open door. The old wood inside, dry from years of disuse, caught immediately. The thing screamed, not with Tommy's voice now, but with a sound like winter wind howling through dead trees. It tried to back away from the growing fire, but I wasn't done. I lit another flare and lunged forward, shoving it straight into the creature's chest. Pain exploded through my left arm as its claws raked down, cutting straight to the bone. The cold of its touch was worse than the pain, like my arm was being frozen solid. But I held on, pushing the flare deeper as the thing thrashed and screamed. The fire from the tower was spreading fast now, creating a wall of heat behind us. The creature's body began to smoke where the flare touched it. Black smoke, thick and oily, poured from the wound. Its yellow eyes flickered like dying candles. "You'll never see him again," it snarled, its voice now like breaking ice. "You'll be alone forever." "No," I said, thinking of Tommy, the real Tommy, not this thing's twisted version of him. "I'll see him again someday, but not like this, not through you." I grabbed a burning piece of wood that had fallen from the tower and drove it into the creature's chest, right next to the flare. The thing let out one final, terrible scream. Its body began to dissolve into black smoke, swirling up into the night sky. The last thing I saw were those yellow eyes, fading like dying embers. Then everything went black. I woke up in the hospital 3 days later. Sarah had found me in the snow after the fire died down. My left arm was gone, frozen so badly they had to take it, but I was alive. Nobody believed our story, of course. They said we got lost in the woods, got hypothermia, imagined the whole thing. The fire tower burning down was blamed on lightning, even though there hadn't been any storms. But Sarah and I know what we saw. And sometimes, on cold nights when my phantom arm aches, I hear whispers in the wind that sound almost like voices. I don't work in the northern forests anymore. Can't handle the cold. But every year, when the first frost comes, I read about more people going missing in those woods. And I wonder if that black smoke, rising into the night sky, wasn't the end of the thing after all. Just another beginning. That was 15 years ago. A lot has changed since then. I work in Arizona now, at a desert park, where the only things I have to worry about are lost hikers and the occasional rattlesnake. No forests, no fog, and definitely no tall things with yellow. Sarah visits sometimes. She's married now, has 2 kids. We don't talk much about what happened that night, but sometimes I catch her looking at the empty sleeve where my left arm used to be, and I know she's remembering. The official report said we got lost in a surprise snowstorm. Said the cold made us hallucinate. They found Jim Harper's body that spring when the snow melted. Officially, he died of exposure. They never found his hunting partner. But here's the thing about official reports. They don't explain everything. They don't explain why my phantom arm aches worst when I hear about people going missing in those northern woods. And they go missing. Every year, always around the first frost. They don't explain why Tommy's compass, the one that never pointed north after he died, suddenly started working again after that night. It sits on my desk now, pointing true north, like it was always meant to. They don't explain why the local Ojibwe people started hanging protective charms in the trees all around that area. Wooden figures that looked like people but backwards, meant to confuse evil spirits. And they definitely don't explain the letters I get sometimes from rangers and hikers up north. Letters describing tall shapes in the fog, the smell of ammonia, the sound of loved ones' voices calling from the trees. I keep those letters in a box under my bed. When I get a new one, I add it to the pile and send the writer the same response. If you hear someone you love calling from the forest, someone you know can't be there, run. Run as fast as you can in the other direction. Don't look back no matter how real their voice sounds. And if you see yellow eyes watching you from the trees, get to somewhere warm and bright. Build a fire big as you can make it, because the thing in those woods, it's still there, still hunting, and it's patient. So patient. I know because every winter I get this feeling right where my left arm used to be. A cold feeling, like ice, forming under my skin. And sometimes in my dreams, I hear Tommy's voice calling me back to those woods. But it's not really Tommy. It never was. It's just the whispers in the pines. Waiting for someone else who's lost something, someone else who's hurting, someone else who might stop running just for a moment when they hear a loved one's voice calling their name through the fog. So if you're ever up in those northern woods, and the fog rolls in thick and strange, and you hear someone calling you. Don't answer, just run. Run until you can't hear the whispers anymore. I seal every letter the same way, with Tommy's old compass printed in ink at the bottom, its needle, pointing true north, a reminder that not all lost things stay lost, and not all found things should be found. The shadows shouldn't have moved like that. I've been a park ranger long enough to know how shadows are supposed to behave when the sun sets behind the mountains. But what I saw that autumn evening in Shenandoah National Park wasn't natural. It was my first warning, though I was too stubborn to listen. My name is Marcus Wells, and I used to think I was brave. After all, I'd spent years as a search and rescue specialist in the city, pulling people from burning buildings and collapsed structures. The burn scar on the left side of my face is a constant reminder of those days. But what happened to me in these mountains changed everything I thought I knew about fear. It was mid-October 1979 when my story began. The trees were showing off their best colors. Bright reds, oranges, and yellows everywhere you looked. The kind of view that makes you stop and stare, forgetting all your worries for a moment. The air was crisp, carrying that sweet smell of fallen leaves, and the sky was that perfect shade of blue you only get in autumn. I'd taken this job at Shenandoah to escape the city and its memories, especially the nightmares about the Hamilton building collapse, where I'd been trapped in the rubble for 6 hours. The wilderness was supposed to be my fresh start. No tight spaces, no falling concrete, just open sky and endless forests. I even kept a piece of that collapsed building in my pocket, a small chunk of concrete to remind me why I left. That evening, I was walking my usual trail near Shadow Ridge. Yes, I know the name should have been a clue. The sun was setting, painting long shadows across the path. I stopped to take in the view, watching the darkness creep across the valley floor. That's when I noticed something odd. There was this one shadow, cast by an old oak tree, while all the other shadows were shifting normally as the sun moved. This one stayed put, just for a few seconds, but long enough to make me blink and look again. By then, it was back to normal, and I told myself I was seeing things. Stress, maybe. Tiredness from a long day of hiking, but then I heard something that made my skin crawl, rustling leaves, but not from the wind. It was too rhythmic, too deliberate, like footsteps but not quite right. When I turned to look, the trail behind me was empty, completely empty. No birds, no squirrels, nothing. In a forest that should have been full of life, there was only silence. I pulled out my flashlight even though there was still plenty of daylight left. Old habits from my rescue days, I guess. That's when I noticed the mist. It was rising from the ground in patches, which was strange because the weather had been dry for weeks. And it wasn't rising everywhere, just in certain spots, like someone had drawn circles on the forest floor. I should have turned back right then, should have radioed in, reported something suspicious. Instead, I did what I always do when I'm scared. I pushed forward. That's my problem, you see. I can't back down, can't show fear. It's what made me good at my old job, and it's what nearly got me killed in these mountains. As I walked deeper into the woods, the shadows grew longer, darker. The temperature dropped faster than it should have, and somewhere in the distance, I heard what sounded like whispers. Not wind through leaves, not animal calls, but actual whispers. Words I couldn't quite make out, in voices that didn't sound quite human. I checked my watch, 5:47 p.m. Sunset wasn't due for another hour, but somehow the forest was already dark as twilight. And in that darkness, I swear I saw something move. Something tall and thin, something that shouldn't have been there at all. That was just the beginning. If I'd known what was waiting for me in the caves beneath Shadow Ridge, I would have run and never looked back. But I didn't know. And that's why I'm telling this story now. to warn others about what lurks in those mountains, in the places where shadows don't behave the way shadows should, because sometimes the darkness isn't just the absence of light. Sometimes the darkness is alive, and it's hungry. I spent that night in my cabin, trying to convince myself that what I'd seen was just my imagination. But deep down, I knew better. 15 years of search and rescue work had taught me to trust my gut, and my gut was screaming that something was very wrong in these mountains. The next morning, I met Tom Harrison, a photographer from National Geographic who'd come to capture the fall colors. He was a friendly guy with thick glasses and a camera bag that looked like it weighed more than he did. When he asked about good spots for sunrise photos, I almost told him to stay away from Shadow Ridge. But that would have meant explaining what I'd seen, and I wasn't ready for that conversation. Beautiful area, Tom said as we walked the trail together. But something feels off, doesn't it? Like the forest is holding its breath. I stopped walking. That was exactly how it felt. The animals are acting strange too, I said, pointing to a group of deer moving through the trees. It was nearly noon, but these normally nocturnal creatures were wide awake, and they seemed to be avoiding certain parts of the forest. They're staying away from the shadowy areas, Tom nodded, snapping pictures. Maybe they know something we don't. We continued hiking until we reached a rocky outcropping I hadn't explored before. There was a narrow opening at its base, the entrance to a cave. As a ranger, I should have known about every cave in my section, but this one wasn't on any of my maps. Let's check it out, Tom said, already pulling out his flashlight. Every instinct told me to say no, but I couldn't let him go alone. Besides, caves were different from collapsed buildings. They were natural, stable. At least, that's what I told myself. The entrance was tight, but opened into a larger chamber. Our flashlight beams revealed walls covered in ancient paintings. They were like nothing I'd ever seen. Tall, skinny figures that seemed to be reaching up toward dots that might have been stars. But the strangest part was how the paint seemed to absorb our light, creating deeper shadows instead of being illuminated by it. "These look old," Tom whispered, taking photos. "Really old." That's when my flashlight started to dim. Not like a dying battery, more like something was drinking the light right out of it. Tom noticed his camera was having trouble too. Every picture came out darker than it should have, with strange shapes in the backgrounds. We went deeper into the cave system, and that's where we found them. Backpacks. 3 of them, lined up against a wall. They looked brand new, but the designs were at least 20 years old. Next to them was a journal, its pages still crisp despite the damp cave air. I picked it up and read the last entry. October 15th, 1956. They're not shadows. They're something else. Something that uses shadows. To move. To hunt. If you're reading this, get out. Get out before the sun sets. Before they get hung. The entry stopped mid-word. A cold draft brushed past us, and our lights dimmed even more. In the darkness, I heard something that made my blood run cold. Whispers, just like the ones from the forest, but closer now. Much closer. "We need to leave," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Now." But as we turned to go, our lights revealed something that shouldn't have been possible. Our own shadows cast on the cave wall were moving, not following our movements, but moving on their own, reaching, stretching, becoming impossibly tall and thin. Tom's camera flash went off accidentally, and in that brief burst of light I saw something that would haunt my dreams forever. Where our shadows should have been, there were figures. They looked almost human, but wrong. Too tall, too thin, with fingers like branches and heads that weren't quite the right shape. We ran like hell, stumbling through the darkness as our lights grew weaker and weaker. Behind us, the whispers turned to something like laughter, echoing off the cave walls. We made it out just as the sun was setting. Tom was shaking so bad he could barely hold his camera. I wasn't much better. "The photos," he said, checking his camera with trembling hands. "We need to see what I caught on film." But we both knew we'd have to wait until tomorrow to develop them. And somehow, I knew that what we'd find in those pictures would only be the beginning of our nightmare. As we walked back to the ranger station, I noticed something that made my stomach turn. The piece of concrete in my pocket, my reminder of why I'd left the city, was ice cold. And when I held it up to the dying light, I could have sworn I saw something moving inside it, like a shadow trapped in stone. The sun was almost gone. Now, and in the growing darkness, every shadow seemed to be watching us, waiting, hungry. That night, neither Tom nor I could sleep. We stayed in my cabin, every light burning bright. I'd never been afraid of the dark before, but now every shadow made me jump. Even the shadow of a coffee mug on my desk seemed to stretch a little too long, move a little too much. "We need to develop these photos," Tom said, clutching his camera like a lifeline. "There's a dark room at the ranger station, right?" I nodded. The sun was just coming up, painting the sky pink. It felt safer in the daylight. But that feeling wouldn't last long. The ranger station's darkroom was small, but had everything we needed. As Tom worked with his chemicals and paper, I paced outside. Every minute felt like an hour. Finally, he called me in. "Marcus," his voice shook, "you need to see this." The photos were laid out on the table. At first glance, they looked normal, just pictures of the cave and its paintings. But in the background of every single one, there they were. Tall, thin figures, their bodies bent at impossible angles. In some photos, they seemed to be reaching for us. In others, they were watching, waiting, but the worst photo was the last one. It showed Tom and me running from the cave. Behind us, our shadows weren't following our movements. Instead, they were standing straight up on the cave wall, their arms stretched out toward us, fingers like long, sharp branches. "This can't be real," I whispered, but I knew it was. The concrete piece in my pocket felt heavier than ever. That's when we heard someone banging on the station's door. It was Sarah Martinez, one of our most experienced hikers. She looked terrified. "My daughter," she gasped. "Jenny's missing. We were camping near Shadow Ridge and she just disappeared, right in front of me." My heart sank. "What happened?" She was playing with her shadow. You know how kids do, making shapes on the tent wall with her hands. But then Sarah's voice broke. Then her shadow grabbed her. It pulled her right through the tent wall. I know it sounds crazy, but I swear that's what happened. Tom and I looked at each other. We knew it didn't sound crazy at all. I grabbed my rescue gear, flashlights, ropes, first aid kit. Years of training kicked in, but this wasn't like any rescue I'd done before. How do you save someone from shadows? "I'm coming with you," Tom said, loading his camera with fresh film. "We need evidence of what's happening." We headed back to the cave, Sarah close behind. The forest felt different now. The beautiful fall colors seemed dimmer, like something was sucking the life right out of them. Even the air felt thick, hard to breathe. As we approached the cave entrance, our flashlights started flickering again. But this time, I was ready. I'd brought every kind of light I could find. Lanterns, flares, even some old emergency lights from the station. "Jenny!" Sarah called out. Her voice echoed in the cave, but the echo, it didn't sound right. It came back wrong, like someone else was saying her daughter's name. We went deeper into the cave system. The walls seemed to pulse with darkness, like they were breathing. Our shadows danced on the walls, sometimes moving with us, sometimes not. The whispers started again, but now we could almost make out words. Stay, hungry, dark, feed. Then we found Jenny's backpack. It was lying next to those other bags we'd found earlier, looking just as new and untouched. But something was different now. All the bags were arranged in a perfect circle, and in the center was a piece of paper. It was a page torn from a child's diary, dated 1953. "Dear Mom and Dad, the shadows are so pretty here. They want to play with me. They say they'll show me where all the other kids went. My hands were shaking as I read it. The writing looked fresh, like it had been written minutes ago, not decades. Suddenly, Tom's camera flash went off by accident again. In that split second of bright light, we saw them. Dozens of shadow people surrounding us on all walls of the cave. Their bodies were like torn paper, their faces empty, except for what looked like stars where their eyes should be, and they were all reaching for us. The real horror was just beginning, and somewhere in this darkness, a little girl needed our help. But as our lights grew dimmer and the shadows grew closer, I started to wonder if we'd just walked right into their trap. My flashlight caught something scratched into the cave wall, words in shaky handwriting. They feed on fear. Light hurts them, but they learn, they adapt. Look at this, I called to Tom and Sarah. As they came closer, I noticed our flashlight beams were getting weaker by the minute. The darkness wasn't just growing, it was eating our light. Jenny! Sarah called again, her voice breaking. Baby, where are you? This time, something answered. It wasn't exactly a voice, more like the sound of rustling leaves forming words. Mother, looking, always looking. Tom's camera flash went off again, and in that burst of light, we saw a small figure ahead. It looked like Jenny, but her shadow was all wrong. It was stretching up the wall, reaching toward the cave ceiling, becoming one of them. Jenny! Sarah started running toward her daughter. Wait! I grabbed her arm. Something wasn't right. Jenny wasn't moving. She was just standing there, her back to us, too still. I pulled out the old journal we'd found earlier and quickly flipped through it. There had to be something, some clue about what these things were and how to fight them. Then I found it. A page with dried blood spots on the corners. They're ancient, been here longer than the mountains. Native tribes called this place where shadows feed. They take people, but not all at once. They play first, like cats with mice. Light hurts them, but they're learning. Each year, they can stand more. Soon, no light will be enough. As if to prove the point, my strongest flashlight flickered and died. Tom, I whispered, when your flash goes off, have you noticed how the shadows pull back? Like they're in pain? He nodded, checking his camera. 3 shots left. Sarah, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. That's not Jenny anymore. Not completely. Look at her shadow. Jenny's shadow had completely separated from her body now. It was moving on its own, dancing across the cave wall like a puppet on strings, and behind it, more shadows were gathering, taking shapes that hurt. My eyes to look at. What do they want? Sarah sobbed. The answer came in that awful whisper voice. To play, to feed, to grow. Tom's flash went off again. 2 shots left. The shadows screamed, a sound like wind through broken glass. In that moment, I saw something that made my blood freeze. The shadow creatures weren't just on the walls anymore. They were coming out, becoming 3-dimensional, their bodies like tears in reality. But that flash showed me something else too. The cave paintings we'd seen earlier, they weren't just art. They were a warning. The figures weren't reaching for stars. They were reaching for light. Any light. The flares, I said, suddenly remembering the emergency flares in my pack. They burn brighter than any flashlight. I had 6 of them. 6 chances to fight back against things that had been hunting in these mountains for who knows how long. That's when Jenny finally turned around. Her eyes were different, like empty holes with pinpricks of light deep inside them. When she spoke, it wasn't her voice anymore. Others came before, with their lights and their weapons. All fed us, all joined us. Your light will fade. All. Light fades. Tom raised his camera, 1 shot left. Sarah reached for her daughter, tears streaming down her face. And I realized we were running out of time. The shadows were closing in, moving faster now. They weren't just shapes on the walls anymore. They were like holes in the world, getting bigger, hungry for more than just darkness. I reached for the flares with shaking hands. The piece of concrete in my pocket felt like ice. And I finally understood why I'd kept it all this time. not as a reminder of my past, but as a warning about my future. Because sometimes the darkest places aren't in collapsed buildings or deep caves. Sometimes the darkest places are where the shadows come alive. And as I pulled out the first flare, I knew we were about to find out if anything could really stop them. The real question wasn't whether we could save Jenny. The real question was, could we save ourselves? My hands were shaking as I held the first flare. One wrong move and we'd be in total darkness. The shadows were everywhere now, moving like oil spills on the walls, ceiling and floor. "Jenny, honey," Sarah called out, her voice trembling. "Fight them, please." Jenny, or what used to be Jenny, tilted her head at an impossible angle. The pinpricks of light in her eyes flickered like dying stars. "Fight? But Mother, I am them now. We are all them now." Tom raised his camera for the last time. "Marcus, whatever you're going to do it now." I struck the flare. Red light exploded through the cave. The shadows shrieked and pulled back, their bodies ripping like paper in wind. For a moment I saw them clearly. Tall, thin beings made of pure darkness, with arms that split into dozens of branching fingers, but Jenny didn't move. The flare light showed her shadow stretching behind her, connecting her to the wall like a puppet to its strings. And those strings were pulling her deeper into the cave. "No!" Sarah lunged forward. I grabbed her just in time, where she would have stepped. The floor had turned to living shadow, a pit of darkness that went down forever. Tom's last camera flash went off. In that extra burst of light, I saw something that gave me hope. The cave paintings were glowing, just a little, like they were made with something more than just paint. "The paintings," I gasped. "They're not just warnings, they're weapons." I ran to the wall, holding the flare close to the ancient art. The paintings began to shine with their own light, soft at first, then brighter. The shadow creatures backed away, hissing like steam from a broken pipe. But then my first flare started to sputter. I lit the second one just in time. The shadows were learning, adapting. They stayed just at the edge of the light, waiting. Jenny was gone now, deeper in the cave, and more shadows were forming behind her. "We have to go after her," Sarah cried. "Wait," I said, an idea hitting me. "Tom, your camera flash, it's magnesium, right? Like the old-time photographers used?" He nodded, understanding in his eyes. "And your flares are magnesium-based too. The brightest man-made light there is..." I pulled out all my remaining flares. "If we set them all off at once, it could create a light bright enough to destroy them," Tom finished. "But there was a catch. To make it work, we'd have to go deeper into the cave, to their main nest, and someone would have to stay behind to light all the flares at once." I looked at the piece of concrete in my pocket one last time. All those years being afraid of tight spaces, of being trapped. Maybe this was why. Maybe everything in my life had led to this moment. "Sarah," I said, "when I give the signal, you and Tom run for the entrance. Don't stop. Don't look back." "What about Jenny?" she asked. "I'm going to get her, but you have to trust me." Tom handed me his camera bag. "The flash powder's in here. Be careful." I nodded, then struck another flare and started walking deeper into the cave. The shadows followed, drawn to my light like moths to a flame. Behind me, I heard Sarah and Tom getting ready to run. The cave went down and down. The shadows were all around me now, whispering, laughing. I saw other faces in the darkness, all the people they'd taken over the years. Jenny was there too, but she wasn't alone anymore. Finally, I reached a huge chamber. The walls were covered in shadow creatures, all connected, all moving together like one giant living thing. In the center was a pit of pure darkness. That's when I understood. They weren't just hiding in the shadows, they were making more darkness, growing it, feeding it. I put down my bag and took out all the flares. The shadow people watched, curious. They thought they knew what light could do. They thought they could handle it. They were wrong. "Hey!" I shouted, my voice echoing. "You want to feed on something? Feed on this!" I struck all the flares at once and threw them into the pit, along with Tom's flash powder and every light source I had. For a second, nothing happened. Then the Kutu world turned white. The light was brighter than the sun, brighter than anything I'd ever seen. The shadows screamed, not in pain, but in real fear. Now they knew how it felt. I closed my eyes, but it didn't help. The light burned through my eyelids, through everything. I felt the concrete in my pocket turn hot, then crumble to dust. The last thing I heard was Jenny's voice, her real voice, calling out, "Mommy?" Then the cave ceiling came down, and everything went dark. I woke up in the hospital 3 days later. The doctor said I was lucky to be alive. The cave-in should have killed me, but somehow I'd ended up near enough to the entrance for the rescue team to find me. My eyes were damaged from the light, burned so badly that I'd have to wear special dark glasses for the rest of my life. But that seemed like a small price to pay. Sarah was there when I woke up. She was holding Jenny's hand. The little girl looked normal now. No starlight in her eyes, no strange shadows following her movements. She didn't remember much about what had happened, and maybe that was for the best. "They found the others," Sarah told me quietly while Jenny slept in. "A chair nearby. All of them. Behind a rock wall that collapsed in the cave-in. Some of the bodies." She paused, squeezing my hand. "Some of them had been there for decades. At least their families can have peace now." Tom's camera survived, though most of his photos were destroyed. The few that remained showed only normal cave shadows, but he knew what we'd seen. We all did. The park officials sealed up the cave, saying it was too dangerous to leave open. They posted warning signs and blocked all the entrances with concrete. But sometimes, on cold nights, hikers say they can still feel cold spots near Shadow Ridge, places where the darkness feels just a little too deep. I quit my ranger job after that. My eyes couldn't handle the sunlight anymore anyway. But before I left, I went back to that first cave entrance one last time. The morning sun was bright, making me glad for my dark glasses. I looked at my shadow on the cave wall. It followed my movements normally, just like a shadow should. But just for a second, just as I was turning to leave, I thought I saw it wave at me, even though my own hand was still at my side. I walk with a flashlight now, even in daylight. I keep my house bright and never let the shadows grow too deep, in any corner. Most people think I'm just strange, maybe a little paranoid after whatever accident hurt my eyes. But Sarah understands. So does Tom. And sometimes, when Jenny visits with her mum, I see her looking carefully at her shadow, making sure it's still behaving like it should. We never talk about what happened in those caves. Who would believe us? But we know the truth. That sometimes darkness is more than just the absence of light. Sometimes it's alive, sometimes it hungers, and sometimes if you look very carefully at your own shadow, you might see it move in ways it shouldn't. If that happens, my advice is simple. Turn on all your lights and run. The first time I heard the silence, I should have run. But when you've spent 15 years working in the wilderness, you start believing you can handle anything the forest throws at you. I was wrong. Dead wrong. My name is Deborah Westlake. Deb to everyone who knows me. And I've been a forest ranger longer than I was a sound engineer for rock bands. That was my old life, before a horrific accident at a concert left me deaf for 6 months. When I finally got my hearing back, I couldn't stand the chaos of city life anymore. Every sound felt like needles in my ears. That's how I ended up here, in the Olympic National Forest, where the gentle drip of rain and whisper of wind through ancient trees became my new kind of music. Spring came early that year, 1985. The kind Of spring, where the fog hugs the mountainsides like a clingy ghost and the rain never really stops. It just takes breaks to think about falling harder. I loved it though. The constant drip, drip, drip from the massive trees was like nature's metronome, keeping time as I made my morning rounds. I was different from the other rangers. While they carried the usual gear, I hauled around something extra, a modified parabolic microphone and recording equipment. It was my personal project, capturing the symphony of the forest. Every bird call, every rustle of leaves, every distant howl, I could identify them all. The other rangers thought I was weird, but they couldn't deny I was good at my job. When you can hear a pine marten sneaking around from 50 yards away, you notice things others miss. That morning started like any other. I left my lookout tower, just as dawn was breaking, the metal stairs clanging softly under my boots. The air was thick with mist, and everything was coated in that deep, velvety green that only the Pacific Northwest can produce. Moss hung from the branches like beards on ancient wizards, and the ferns spread out beneath the towering trees like a rippling green carpet. But something felt off. I didn't notice it right away. It crept up on me slowly, like a shadow growing, longer as the sun sets. I was recording the morning chorus of birds when I first spotted it, a perfect circle in the forest floor, maybe 30 feet across, where nothing grew. Not a single fern, not one blade of grass. Just bare earth, as if someone had drawn a circle with a giant compass. That was strange enough, but what really got me was the sound, or rather the lack of it. As I approached the circle, the usual forest sounds began to fade, like someone was slowly turning down nature's volume knob. The bird calls, the insects, even the eternal drip of water from the canopy above. Everything just stopped. I'd seen some weird things in my years as a ranger, but this was different. My hand tightened around my recording equipment as I stepped closer to the edge of the circle. The silence wasn't just quiet, it was wrong. It felt heavy, like the air before a massive storm, but worse. It felt hungry. I didn't know it then, but that circle was just the beginning. I had no idea that my precious forest was hiding something ancient and terrible. Something that would make me wish I'd never gotten my hearing back at all. Something that knew I was listening and, worse still, was listening back. If I'd known what was coming, maybe I would have packed up my gear and left that very morning, but I didn't. Instead, I did what any good ranger would do. I marked the location on my map and started taking notes. After all, part of my job was investigating unusual phenomena in the forest. The Park Service had recently asked me to look into some strange seismic readings in the area. I figured this might be related. As I crouched at the edge of that dead circle, scribbling in my notebook, I heard something that made my blood run cold. It wasn't a sound exactly, more like the memory of a sound, or maybe the promise of one. A vibration so low, it made my teeth ache and my stomach turn. I switched on my recording equipment, hoping to capture whatever it was. But when I played it back, all I heard was static and a weird, pulsing tone that made me feel dizzy. That should have been my second warning. But by then, I was already too curious, too invested, and honestly, too stubborn to walk away. I had no way of knowing that my curiosity would nearly cost me my life, or that my beloved forest was about to become a nightmare I couldn't wake up from. Sometimes I wonder if the entity was already watching me that morning, sizing me up, planning how it would use my own ears against me. But that's getting ahead of the story. First, I need to tell you about the other circles I found, and the strange things that started happening to my equipment, about the trees that sang when they shouldn't, and the animals that stopped moving but didn't die. About how the forest itself seemed to be trying to warn me, right up until the moment everything went terribly, horribly wrong. Over the next few days, I found more of those circles. Each one was exactly the same size, and each one had that same heavy silence hanging over it. But what really got to me was how they were arranged. Like someone had drawn a giant pattern across the forest floor. I marked each one on my map, and when I connected the dots back at my tower that night, they made a perfect hexagon. That's when the hair on the back of my neck started to stand up. I tried to be logical about it. That's what rangers do. We look for reasonable explanations. Maybe it was something in the soil, or underground gas pockets, or even some kind of fungus. But none of those explanations felt right, especially after what happened with my recording equipment. It started with the batteries. Brand new ones would die within minutes near those circles. I went through a whole pack in one morning, which wasn't normal at all. Then my microphone started picking up sounds that shouldn't have been there. Deep, rumbling noises that made me feel sick to my stomach when I played them back. But the worst part? The trees. I found the first one on a cloudy Tuesday morning, a massive old Douglas fir with its bark stripped off in perfect geometric shapes, like someone had carved a pattern into it. The exposed wood looked ancient, grey and weathered, even though the tree had been healthy just days before. When the wind blew through it, it made a sound like someone humming a tune just at the edge of hearing. I'm not easily spooked. You can't be in this job. But when I found a group of deer just standing there completely still, like they were frozen in time, I almost radioed for backup. They were breathing, their eyes were moving, but they wouldn't respond to anything. Not to noise, not to touch, nothing. They just stood there, staring at something I couldn't see. The birds noticed it too. Usually they have their regular flight paths, especially during migration season. But now they were flying in circles over certain areas of the forest, like they were caught in invisible whirlpools in the sky. I'd never seen anything like it in all my years as a ranger. My radio started acting up too. Sometimes it would work perfectly fine, and other times all I'd get was static and these weird echoing sounds that almost seemed like words played backward. The other rangers thought I was making it up when I reported it. But I knew what I was hearing. After all, I'd spent years working with sound equipment. I knew the difference between normal interference and whatever this was. Then I found the old seismic monitoring equipment. It was hidden under some ferns, half buried in the dirt, the kind of gear scientists use to measure earthquakes. The display was cracked, but it was still showing its last reading. Some kind of massive spike that went right off the charts before the machine died. The date on it was from just a few months ago, right around when the Park Service started getting strange reports from this area. The weather started changing too, but not in any way that made sense. Small storms would appear out of nowhere, right over specific spots in the forest. They'd rage for a few minutes, then vanish like they'd never been there. The other rangers said it was just normal mountain weather, but I knew better. These storms always happened over those circles, or in the spaces between them. One evening, as I was heading back to my tower, all sound just stopped. Not like in the circles where it faded away. This was like someone had hit a mute button on the whole world. I could see birds singing, branches moving in the wind, but I couldn't hear any of it. It lasted for exactly 1 minute. I timed it. When the sound came back, it was like a wave washing over me, and for a second I thought I heard music in it. Not normal music, but something that made my teeth vibrate and my head spin. That night, I stayed up late reviewing all my recordings. I played them backward, forward at different speeds. What I found made my blood run cold. In the background of every recording, barely audible, was a pattern, a rhythm. Like something was tapping out a message I couldn't quite understand. I should have reported all of this to my supervisors right away. That's protocol, but something held me back. Maybe it was pride. I wanted to figure this out myself. Maybe it was curiosity, or maybe it was something else. Because by then, I'd started hearing patterns in everything. The rain on my tower's roof, the wind in the trees, even the crackle of my radio. They all seemed to be speaking in a language I was right on the edge of understanding. I didn't know it then, but that was exactly what it wanted. It was teaching me to listen, getting ready to show me things no human was ever supposed to hear. And I, like an idiot, was learning its language one horrifying lesson at a time. Looking back, I can see how it trapped me. Like a spider spinning its web, it drew me in bit by bit. I kept telling myself I was investigating, being scientific, doing my job. But really, I was becoming obsessed. I started spending all my free time recording the forest sounds. Every morning, I'd wake up before dawn and head out to those circles, setting up my equipment in different spots. The patterns were getting clearer now. Sometimes, when I played the recordings at half speed, I could almost make out words. My journal filled up with notes. I drew diagrams of where the circles were, tracked the weird storms, marked where I found the frozen animals. It was like putting together a puzzle, but I didn't know what picture I was trying to make. Then came the day I found the cave. It wasn't on any of my maps, which was strange because I thought I knew every inch of my section of the forest. It was hidden behind a fallen tree, and the entrance was perfectly round, just like those circles. The air coming out of it was warm and smelled like ozone, like the air after lightning strikes. I stood at the entrance for a long time, shining my flashlight into the darkness. My common sense was screaming at me to back away, to radio for backup, to do anything except go in there alone. But then I heard it, a sound like music, but not like any music I'd ever heard before. It reminded me of whale songs, but deeper, stranger. Just a quick look, I told myself, just 5 minutes. I clicked on my recorder and stepped into the cave. The beam of my flashlight showed smooth walls, too smooth to be natural. They were covered in strange marks that looked almost like musical notes, but they shifted and changed when I tried to focus on them. The deeper I went, the stronger that strange music got. It wasn't coming from anywhere specific. It seemed to be coming from the walls themselves. My recorder was picking up something too. The needle on my audiometer was jumping all over the place. That's when my flashlight started to flicker. I turned to head back, but the tunnel behind me looked different. Had I taken a turn without realizing it? The walls all looked the same, with those weird shifting marks. My flashlight died completely. In the pitch darkness, the music got louder. It wasn't beautiful anymore, it was terrible. It made my head spin and my stomach lurch. I could feel it in my bones, like my whole body was turning into one big tuning fork. I ran like I've never run before, following the faint light from the entrance. I tripped and fell hard, skinning my knees on the rock floor. But I got up and kept running until I burst out into the daylight. When I finally caught my breath and checked my recorder, the tape was completely blank. Not just blank. It was like it had never been used at all, but my skinned knees proved I hadn't imagined it. The cave was real. Back in my tower that night, I tried to make sense of what had happened. I spread out all my notes on the floor, looking for patterns. The circles, the storms, the frozen animals, the cave, they had to be connected. I started drawing lines between events on my map, and suddenly I saw it. Everything was centered around one spot in the forest, a place the local tribes used to call the Hollow. I found an old report about the area in my files. 20 years ago, the military had done some kind of secret sound weapon testing there. The project was shut down after a series of unexplained accidents. The report was full of blacked-out sections, but one phrase caught my eye. Resonance frequencies beyond expected parameters. That night, the dreams started. I heard that awful music in my sleep, and in the dreams, I understood what it was saying. I woke up with my pillow wet with tears, but I couldn't remember why I'd been crying. The next morning, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. The trees around my tower had started losing their bark in geometric patterns. The same patterns I'd seen in the cave. The thing in the forest wasn't just out there anymore. It was getting closer. It was coming for me. And the worst part? Part of me wanted to hear more of its terrible music. Part of me wanted to understand what it was trying to say. That's when I realized I wasn't just investigating anymore. I was being hunted, and like a fool, I'd been following the hunter's trail the whole time. The first time I saw it, I thought my eyes were playing tricks on me. It was just after sunset, and I was checking the equipment I'd set up near one of the circles. The air got thick, like looking through water, and then I saw it. A shape that shouldn't exist. Imagine a person made of rippling air, like the heat waves you see above hot pavement. But this thing was tall, impossibly tall. It swayed like seaweed in an ocean current, its body made up of thousands of thin, moving threads that vibrated like guitar strings. I stood perfectly still, hardly daring to breathe. My recorder was running, but the needle on the meter was going crazy, swinging back and forth so hard I thought it might break. The air felt heavy, pressing against my ears like I was deep underwater. Then it turned towards me. It didn't have a face exactly, but I knew it was looking at me. I felt it in my bones. That's when the sound started. A deep, thundering pulse that made my teeth chatter and my vision blur. My knees went weak and I had to grab a tree to stay standing. The thing moved closer. Each step it took made the air ripple like someone had thrown a stone into a pond. Birds burst from the trees, flying in panic, but they moved in slow motion, like they were trapped in invisible syrup. I should have run. Every instinct in my body was screaming at me to run, but I couldn't move. The sound it was making had changed. Now it was like 1,000 voices whispering just below the edge of hearing, almost like words, almost like music, but wrong in a way that made my skin crawl. My recorder exploded. Not with fire or anything. Like that, it just fell apart, every screw and wire separating like someone had reversed time on its assembly. The pieces floated in the air for a moment, then dropped to the ground. That's what broke the spell. I ran. I ran so fast, my lungs burned, crashing through bushes and jumping over fallen logs. Behind me, I heard trees groaning and cracking, their bark peeling off in waves as the thing followed me. I made it back to my tower and slammed the door. Through the windows, I could see the forest moving in ways it shouldn't. Trees swayed against the wind. Shadows stretched in impossible directions, and that sound, that awful, beautiful, terrible sound, kept getting louder. My radio crackled to life, making me jump. Through the static, I heard a voice calling for help. Someone was lost in the forest. Part of me knew it was a trick. The thing was trying to lure me out. But what if it wasn't? What if someone really was out there? I grabbed my emergency kit and opened the door. The forest had gone quiet again, but not the normal quiet of night. This was the hungry quiet I'd first noticed in those circles. My flashlight beam showed empty trails and still trees. No sign of the entity. "Hello," I called out. "This is Ranger Westlake. Is anyone there?" The answer came from behind me. My own voice played back like a recording, but distorted and wrong. "Is anyone there? There?" I spun around. And there it was, right at the base of my tower. Up close, I could see through its body to the trees behind it, like it was made of living glass. The vibrating threads that made up its form were moving faster now, humming with energy. That's when I realized what it was doing. It wasn't just mimicking sounds, it was learning them. Learning how to make them, learning how to use them as a weapon. And I, with my years of sound engineering experience and my special recording equipment, had been teaching it everything it needed to know. I backed into my tower and locked the door, but I knew that wouldn't stop it. The windows were vibrating, now making a high-pitched whine that got higher and higher until I had to cover my ears. Outside, the thing stood perfectly still, its body rippling like a heat mirage. It was testing me, I realized, testing my defenses, testing my fears, and somewhere in the back of my mind, in a place I didn't want to look too closely at, I could feel it testing the frequencies of my own bones, searching for the one that would make them shatter. That night turned into the longest of my life. I huddled in my tower as the thing outside tried to find a way in. The metal walls hummed with its sounds, making my head spin and my stomach turn. Every few minutes the windows would shake so hard I thought they might shatter. I tried the radio, again and again, but all I got was static and echoes of that thing's awful music. I was trapped. The trails leading away from my tower were blocked by fallen trees that had been healthy and standing just hours ago. The thing had planned. This, I realized. It had been planning it all along. Around midnight, I heard a real voice on the radio. "Ranger Westlake, this is search and rescue. We got reports of strange lights and sounds in your area. Do you copy?" My heart jumped. Help was coming. But then I remembered. The thing could copy voices now. "Don't come!" I shouted into the radio. "Whatever you hear, don't come up here." But it was too late. 20 minutes later, I saw flashlight beams moving through the trees. 2 rescue workers were making their way up the trail, somehow finding paths through the fallen trees. I watched in horror as they got closer. The entity was nowhere to be seen, but I could feel it waiting. The air around my tower rippled like the surface of a pond in the rain. "Over here!" I screamed from my window. "Get back, it's not safe." One of them looked up at me, shining his flashlight. "Ranger Westlake, are you hurt? We're coming to..." That's when it happened. The air between us seemed to fold in on itself, and the entity appeared. In the crossing flashlight beams, I could see every vibrating thread of its impossible body. It towered over the rescue workers, its form rippling with energy. The sound it made was like nothing I'd ever heard before. It was every frequency at once, a wall of noise that hit like a physical force. I saw the younger rescue worker clutch his chest and fall. The other one tried to run, but the sound caught him too. They both lay there, so still they looked like the frozen animals I'd found in the forest. I had to do something. These men were here because of me. Looking around my tower frantically, my eyes fell on my sound equipment. All those years as a sound engineer, all that knowledge about frequencies and vibrations, maybe that was why the thing had chosen me, but maybe that was also how I could fight it. I grabbed my backup recorder and my old mixing board, the ones I hadn't used near the circles. My hands shook as I hooked them up to the tower's metal frame. The whole structure was like one big antenna, and if I could find the right frequency, the entity was right outside now. The tower's metal walls groaned under the assault of its sounds. My ears felt like they were full of broken glass, and blood had started trickling from my nose. But I kept working. I thought about what I knew, how it had appeared during storms, how it got stronger near water, how lightning seemed to affect it. Everything had a resonant frequency, a sound that could make it break apart. Even this thing had to follow the laws of physics, right? I turned on my equipment and started cycling through frequencies. Each one made the tower shake differently. The entity's form wavered and rippled faster. It was trying to match my frequencies, to turn them back against me. My head felt like it was going to explode. Blood ran from my ears, and my vision blurred with every new sound wave. But then I saw it. When I hit certain frequencies, the thing's form would distort, its threads tangling up like confused strings. I pushed everything to maximum power, focusing on those frequencies. The tower rang like a giant bell. The entity's form started to come apart, its threads unraveling like a sweater being pulled apart. But it fought back. It sent a blast of sound so powerful it shattered every window in the tower. Glass rained down as I dove under my desk. The mixing board sparked and smoked. I could feel the sound trying to pull my bones apart. That's when the storm hit, a real storm this time, with lightning cracking right above us. The entity's form stretched toward the sky, drawn to the electricity. I had one chance. I grabbed the sparking mixing board and held it up to the broken window into the rain. "Come on," I whispered, "just a little closer." Lightning struck the tower. Electricity surged through my equipment, through the metal walls, through me. The pain was unbelievable. But through my screaming, I heard something else screaming too. A sound so high and terrible, it felt like the world was being torn in half. Then everything went black. I woke up 3 days later in a hospital bed. The doctors told me I was lucky to be alive. The lightning strike had traveled through the tower's metal frame and my equipment, but somehow I'd survived. They had to put titanium plates in my skull. Where the electricity had done the most damage, the rescue workers lived too, though they don't remember anything about that night. They woke up in the forest with nothing wrong with them, except a ringing in their ears that lasted a few weeks. The official report says they were hit by some kind of shock wave when lightning struck my tower. The Forest Service tried to explain everything away. The circles in the forest, just a weird kind of fungus, they said. The stripped trees, some new kind of bark disease, the strange sounds, equipment malfunction, the storms, normal mountain weather. I tried to tell them what really happened, but they didn't want to hear it. They transferred me to a desk job, saying it was for medical reasons. Maybe they were right. I couldn't work in the forest anymore anyway. Not with what the lightning strike did to my hearing. See, my ears are different now. Normal sounds hurt, like everything's too loud and too sharp. But that's not the worst part. The worst part is what I can hear that nobody else can. The titanium. Plates in my head, they vibrate sometimes like tuning forks picking up distant sounds. And late at night, when everything's quiet, I hear it. That same awful music, far away but getting closer. Sometimes I wake up to find my windows vibrating, just slightly, in patterns that remind me of those marks in the cave. I've done research. Since then, found old stories from the local tribes about tall, thin creatures that could steal voices and appeared after big earthquakes. Found more details about those military sound weapon tests and about how the scientists involved all went deaf or crazy or both. The Forest Service cleaned up the area around my tower, cut down the marked trees, filled in the circles with fresh dirt, sealed up the cave. They pretend nothing happened, but hikers still report strange things in that part of the forest. Places where sound behaves wrong, spots where they feel dizzy and sick for no reason, areas where their phones and cameras stop working. I think about going back sometimes. The plates in my head buzz when I think about it, like they're picking up signals from something that's waiting for me, something that learned from me, that knows how to use sound as a weapon because I taught it how. But I stay away. I move to a small house by the ocean, where the constant sound of waves helps drown out the other sounds, the ones that come from somewhere else. I don't use recording equipment anymore, don't even keep batteries in the house. Some frequencies are better left unheard. Still, on stormy nights when the wind blows just right, I hear it. That impossible music carried on the edge of the thunder. And I know it's still out there in the forest, growing stronger, learning. New sounds, waiting for someone else who will listen too carefully to things they shouldn't hear. So if you're ever hiking in the Olympic National Forest, and you find a perfect circle where nothing grows, or hear music that sounds almost like words, or feel the air start to ripple like heat waves on a cold day, run as fast as you can, and whatever you do, don't stop to listen, because now it knows how to call you, it knows how to make you want to hear more, and once it gets inside your head, it never really leaves. I should know. I can hear it even now as I write this. Getting closer, getting clearer, getting ready. The day I lost 3 fingers and part of my foot started just like any other winter day in the White Mountains, except for one thing. The snow was falling upward. I've been a forest ranger for 15 years, and I've seen just about everything. These mountains can throw at a person. Blizzards that turn day into night, trees that crack like gunshots when the temperature drops too fast. But nothing prepared me for what I found in Frost Hollow that winter of 1964. My name is Franklin Osgood, Frank to everyone who knows me, and I'm the senior ranger at Station 23, the most remote outpost in New Hampshire's White Mountains. 30 miles from the nearest plowed road. It's the kind of place where you have to be comfortable being alone. Most days, that's exactly how I like it. I used to be an Olympic athlete, training for the biathlon. That's cross-country skiing and shooting. Combined, a bad fall crushed those dreams back in '52, but it led me here to these mountains. They became my home, especially after Sarah, my wife, passed away 5 years ago. She froze to death in her car during a blizzard while trying to reach me at the station. The mountains took her, but I couldn't leave them. They were all I had left of her. That evening, I was doing my usual patrol on my snowmobile. The sun was setting behind thick grey clouds, and the temperature gauge on my jacket showed -20 degrees. The snow was deep, about 15 feet in some places, and perfect for tracking animals. I carried my usual gear, emergency supplies, my rifle and the wooden compass case Sarah had carved for me before she died. I never went anywhere without it. The stillness hit me first. In weather this cold, you usually hear trees cracking or ice shifting. But there was nothing, just silence. The kind of silence that makes your ears ring because they're trying so hard to hear something, anything. I stopped my snowmobile on a ridge overlooking the valley. The snow crystals caught the last bits of sunlight, making the whole mountain sparkle like diamonds. It was beautiful, but something felt wrong, really wrong. That's when I noticed the tracks. Deer tracks, perfectly preserved in the fresh snow, moving in a straight line through the trees. I followed them with my eyes until they just stopped. Not like the deer had jumped or changed direction. The tracks just ended, as if the deer had vanished into thin air mid-step. I've tracked thousands of animals in my career. I'd never seen anything like this. As I stood there puzzling over it, I saw something that made my blood run cold. The falling snow. It wasn't falling anymore. In small pockets between the trees, snowflakes were drifting upward, like they were being pulled into the sky by invisible strings. I rubbed my eyes, thinking the dim light was playing tricks on me. But no, there it was again. Little clusters of snow, defying gravity, dancing upward into the darkening sky. That's when I heard it. A crackling sound, like electricity, but there weren't any power lines for miles. The hair on the back of my neck stood up, and my breath, which should have been steaming in the frigid air, suddenly wasn't visible at all. Something was very wrong in these mountains, and I was about to find out exactly what. I should have turned back right then. That's what my gut was telling me, but I had a job to do, and people counted on me to do it. Besides, there had to be a logical explanation for what I was seeing. There always is. I got off my snowmobile and pulled out my flashlight. The sun had set now, leaving only the dim glow of twilight. The beam cut through the darkness, bouncing off the snow crystals. As I walked toward where the deer tracks ended, my boots crunching in the snow, I noticed something else strange. It was getting colder, way colder. The temperature gauge on my jacket had shown -20 degrees just minutes ago. Now it read -60. That's impossible in New Hampshire, even in the deadest part of winter. I tapped the gauge, thinking it must be broken. It wasn't. Then I saw the trees. They were wrong. I've seen frozen trees hundreds of times, but these were different. Their leaves were still green, in the middle of winter, but when I touched one, it shattered like glass. The entire tree was frozen solid, so fast that the leaves hadn't even had time to die. My hands were shaking as I pulled out my radio to call it in. Nothing but static. I checked my watch. It had stopped, but when I pulled it away from that spot, it started ticking again, showing the right time like nothing had happened. "Hello?" I called out, more from habit than expecting an answer. My voice sounded flat in the strange stillness, like the air itself was frozen. That's when I spotted the campsite. It was just visible through the trees, a blue tent half buried in snow. As a ranger, finding an abandoned campsite usually means trouble. But this was different. Everything was perfectly preserved, like someone had just been there moments ago. I approached carefully, scanning the area with my flashlight. No footprints leading away. Just like the deer tracks, any signs of people coming or going had vanished. The tent flap was open. Inside, I found a thermos of coffee. When I picked it up, I could feel the liquid inside was solid, frozen through. The insulation. Next to it was an open backpack with a half-eaten sandwich, a map, and a camera. The camera caught my attention. It was one of those instant types that prints photos right away. A stack of photos lay scattered nearby. I picked them up, shining my flashlight on them. My hands went numb, and not from the cold. The photos showed the campsite during daylight. Normal at first, just trees and snow. But in the background of each picture, in the shadows between trees, there was something. A shape, tall and thin, like a person, but wrong. In each photo, it was closer to the camera. In the last photo, it was at the edge of the campsite, its outline barely visible but unmistakably there. The shape looked like it was made of ice. A crackling sound made me spin around, my flashlight beam cutting through the darkness. Nothing but the cold. It was getting worse. Much worse. My breath should have been making clouds in the air, but I couldn't see it at all. Then I noticed the birds. Crows were circling overhead, at night, which they never do. They were circling something dead in the valley below, but despite the easy meal, none of them would land. They just kept circling, like something was keeping them away. I needed to get back to my snowmobile. Whatever was happening here, I needed backup. But as I turned to leave, my flashlight caught something that made my heart stop. Footprints in the fresh snow. Human footprints. But they were wrong, starting normal at first, then getting longer and longer, stretching out impossibly until they just disappeared. Just like the deer tracks. Just like the missing campers. The crackling sound came again, closer this time. And with it the temperature dropped another 20 degrees. Something was out there in the darkness, something that shouldn't exist, and it was getting closer. I ran. I'm not ashamed to admit it. 20 years in these mountains. And I've never run from anything. But those footprints, that shape in the photos, the impossible cold. My instincts were screaming at me to get out of there. I reached my snowmobile and grabbed the radio again. This time I got through, barely. Static filled most of the transmission, but I heard Kevin's voice. He's the new forest technician who started last month. Frank, that you? You're breaking up. Kevin, listen carefully, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. Something's wrong up here in Section 7. I need you to... The radio went dead. Not just dead, it was frozen solid. Frost was creeping across. It like living things, spreading in strange patterns I'd never seen before. That's when I noticed all the animals were gone. In winter, you usually see tracks everywhere, rabbits, foxes, deer. But around me, in a perfect circle, there were no tracks at all. Like every living thing knew to stay away. A sound made me look up. Through the trees, I saw movement. Something. Tall was walking between the trunks, something that looked like it was made of ice and shadow. I raised my flashlight, but when the beam hit that spot, nothing was there. But it had left something behind. The trees it had passed were covered in strange ice crystals growing right before my eyes. They weren't normal ice. They were spreading, like mold, forming patterns that looked almost like frozen faces. I heard Kevin's snowmobile before I saw it. The headlight cut through the darkness as he pulled up beside me. He was young, maybe 25, with the kind of confidence that comes from not knowing enough to be scared. "Frank, what's going on? You look like you've seen a ghost." I started to answer, but my words froze in my throat. Behind Kevin, about 50 yards back, I saw it again. The thing. It was clearer this time. tall and thin, with long arms that ended in sharp points. Its body looked like it was made of clear ice, and inside I could see things moving, dark shapes trapped in the ice. "Kevin," I said as calmly as I could, "start your snowmobile, now." He must have heard something in my voice because he didn't argue. But before he could reach for the ignition, the temperature dropped so fast it took my breath away. The air itself seemed to crystallize. "Frank?" Kevin's voice shook. He saw it too now. "What is that?" The thing was closer. It didn't walk. It glided, leaving trails of frost behind it. The cold coming off it was like nothing I'd ever felt, like being hit with liquid nitrogen. "Run!" I shouted. But it was too late. Ice started forming around Kevin's boots, climbing up his legs faster than he could move. He screamed, a sound I'll never forget, as the ice spread up his body. I reached for him, but the cold was so intense it burned through my gloves. In seconds, Kevin was completely encased in ice. Through the clear surface, I could see his face frozen in terror. Then, with a sound like breaking glass, the ice shattered. There was nothing left of Kevin but fragments scattered across the snow. The thing, the frost stalker, as I later came to think of it, turned its faceless head toward me. Where its eyes should have been, there were only swirling patterns of frost. I did the only thing I could think of. I grabbed the emergency flares from my snowmobile and ran. Not toward the station, that was too far, but I knew these mountains better than anything living or whatever this thing was. And I knew there was an old ranger cabin less than a mile away. Behind me I heard that crackling sound again, closer now. Ice was spreading across the ground in my wake, trying to catch my feet. The cold was so intense it felt like my lungs were freezing with each breath. But I kept running, because now I knew what had happened to the missing campers, to the deer, with the vanishing tracks, to everyone who had disappeared in these mountains over the years, and I knew that if I stopped, I would join them. I reached the cabin with frozen lungs and legs that felt like lead. My hands were shaking so bad I could barely get the key into the lock. Behind me, through the swirling snow, I could see it coming. The frost stalker moved like fog across the ground, leaving everything frozen in its path. The cabin was small, just one room with basic supplies. Emergency food, water, some first aid supplies, and most importantly, a wood stove. I slammed the door shut and started grabbing anything that would burn. Old newspapers, logs from the stack by the stove, even the wooden chair in the corner. That's when I remembered something from my training days. These creatures, things that live in extreme cold, they usually hate heat. It was just a theory. But right now, it was all I had. The temperature in the cabin was dropping fast. Frost was creeping up the walls, forming those same weird patterns I'd seen before. Through the window, I could see the thing getting closer. In the moonlight, I could finally see it clearly, and I wished I couldn't. It was like someone had taken all the people who'd ever frozen to death in these mountains and merged them with the ice itself. Inside its transparent body, I could see faces, hands pressed against the surface like they were trying to get out. Some of them looked ancient, preserved for who knows how long. The windows started freezing over. Ice so thick it was like looking through cloudy glass. The door was next, frost spreading across it in seconds. I worked faster, stuffing paper under the logs in the stove. My hands were shaking so bad I could barely hold the matches. That's when I saw Sarah's face. It was there, in the ice covering the window. My wife's face, perfectly preserved in the frost. Her eyes closed like she was sleeping, just like she'd looked that night they found her in her car. "No," I whispered. "You don't get to use her against me." The thing was right outside now. The walls of the cabin creaked as the temperature dropped even further. The water in my canteen turned to solid ice. My breath came out in clouds that froze and fell to the floor like snow. Finally, the fire caught. A small flame at first, then bigger as it caught the paper and started spreading to the logs. The heat felt amazing against my frozen skin, but more importantly, I noticed something. Where the warmth touched the walls, the frost patterns retreated. The frost stalker noticed too. It made a sound like cracking ice, and for the first time it seemed hesitant, but I wasn't done. I reached into my pack and pulled out the emergency flares, the kind that burn hot enough to melt metal. I had 3 of them. I just hoped they would be enough. The door burst open with a sound like an explosion, and the thing came in. The cold hit me like a physical force, nearly putting out my fire. Ice started forming on my clothes, in my hair, on my skin. Where it touched, it burned worse than any fire. The frost stalker reached for me with those long, sharp arms. Inside its body, the faces seemed to watch with empty eyes. Sarah's face was among them now, and seeing her there made something inside me snap. I struck the first flare. The magnesium flame burst to life with a hiss, burning white hot. The creature recoiled, making that awful cracking sound again. Where the light touched it, its ice body started to steam. But I could feel myself weakening. My fingers were turning blue, and I couldn't feel my feet anymore. The cold was seeping into my bones, trying to make me part of its collection. I had to end this now, and I knew exactly how. I just hoped I would survive what came next. With numb fingers, I grabbed the other 2 flares and the can of camping fuel from my emergency pack. The frost stalker was still backing away from the first flare, but I could tell the light was getting dimmer. It wouldn't last much longer. My plan was crazy, but it was all I had. The thing was drawn to heat. It wanted to freeze anything warm, so I would give it more heat than it could handle. "You want warmth?" I shouted at it, my voice hoarse from the cold. "Come and get it." I threw the can of fuel into the wood stove, where the fire was already burning hot. Then I lit the second flare and threw it in too. The explosion wasn't huge, but it sent flames shooting out of the stove. The creature screamed, a sound like a frozen lake cracking in spring. The faces trapped in its ice body seemed to scream with it. Sarah's face was still there, but now her eyes were open, and she seemed to be looking right at me. "I'm sorry," I whispered, though I wasn't sure if I was talking to Sarah or to myself. The cold was so bad now I could barely move. Ice was forming on my eyelashes, making it hard to see. My fingers were turning black with frostbite, but I had 1 flare left. The frost stalker was moving toward me again, recovering from the shock of the fire. Its icy body was changing, growing, larger, sprouting new sharp points like a crystal, growing in fast motion. The faces inside swirled and changed, dozens of them now, all screaming silently. I waited until it was almost on top of me. The cold was so intense I felt like my blood was turning to ice. My legs wouldn't move anymore. They were frozen to the floor. This was my last chance. With everything I had left, I struck the final flare and threw it. Not at the creature, but at the pile of logs next to the stove. Logs soaked in spilled camping fuel. The cabin exploded into flames. The heat was incredible, like being inside the sun. The frost stalker reared back, its ice body starting to melt and crack. The faces inside it twisted in what looked like pain. Sarah's face was the last one I saw before the creature's form began to break apart, but the cold was fighting back. Ice and fire battled for control of the cabin, steam filling the air until I couldn't see anything. I could feel my frozen fingers cracking, my feet burning with frostbite, even as the flames roared around me. Through the steam and smoke, I saw the frost stalker beginning to collapse. Pieces of it were falling away, melting, revealing the dark. Shapes inside, but as it fell apart, it reached for me one last time with those sharp, icy fingers. I felt them touch my hand, my foot. The pain was unbelievable. Then the roof collapsed in a shower of burning logs and snow, and everything went black. The last thing I remember was Sarah's face, not frozen in ice anymore, but smiling like she used to on warm summer days. Then the darkness took me, and I thought that was the end. But it wasn't. Not quite. They found me 3 days later, half frozen in the ruins of the cabin. The rescue team said it was a miracle I survived. The doctors said the same thing when they had to remove 3 of my fingers and part of my left foot due to frostbite. The official report blamed everything on a freak storm and an avalanche. They said the cold temperatures messed with my head, made me see things that weren't there. They had explanations for everything. The frozen trees, the missing campers, even. Poor Kevin. Nature can be cruel, they said. Sometimes things happen that we can't explain. But I know what I saw. After I got out of the hospital, I started digging through old records. I found reports going back to the 1860s, when the first logging camps were set up in these mountains. The loggers had stories about something they called the winter that walks. Every 25 to 30 years, people would go missing in the same valleys. They'd find abandoned camps, frozen solid in strange ways, just like what I saw. I went back to work as a ranger, but I don't do winter patrols anymore. Can't really, with my missing fingers and bad foot. They ache something fierce whenever the temperature drops below freezing, like they remember what happened that night. The Forest Service built new emergency shelters all through that area. They're better stocked than usual. Lots of emergency supplies, extra heating equipment. They say it's because of the dangerous weather up there, but I noticed they put in more than just the usual supplies. There are magnesium flares in every shelter, industrial heaters, things that make lots of heat. Sometimes on cold winter nights, I look out my window toward Frost Hollow. The Weather Service says the temperatures up there are getting colder every year, breaking records that have stood for decades. When I hear that, I think about the thing I saw, with its body of living ice and all those faces trapped inside. I think about how it didn't die that night. Not really. The heat drove it back, melted its form, but I know it just retreated deeper, into the mountains, waiting, growing stronger as the winters get colder. Last week, a hiker reported seeing snow falling upward in one of the valleys. The same valley where they found an empty campsite, everything frozen solid. The Forest Service closed that area, saying there was a risk of avalanches. But I know better. I keep Sarah's compass case on my desk now. Sometimes when I look at it, I remember her face in that thing's icy body. But more often I remember her smile, the way she loved these mountains despite their dangers. She used to say that the most beautiful places are often the most dangerous. To anyone reading this who might venture into those mountains in winter, if you see snow falling upward, or find tracks that end in nothing, or feel a cold that burns, deeper than any natural chill, run. Run as fast as you can toward warmth and light, because the winter that walks is still out there, and it's getting stronger. The day I saw the dead birds, I should have run. But 25 years of being a ranger had taught me to trust science over fear. That was my first mistake. I remember that evening like it was yesterday. The sun was setting over the Okefenokee swamp, turning the usually brown water into sheets of blood-red glass. I was in my patrol boat, doing my final rounds before dark. The air was thick and hot, the kind of heat that makes your clothes stick to your skin like wet paper. We were in the middle of the worst drought I'd seen in my career, and the water. Levels had dropped so low that old cypress stumps were poking their heads up like ancient creatures coming up for air. My name is Michael Tanner. I'm a ranger here in the Okefenokee, though most folks just call me Mike. At 42, I've spent more time with alligators and water snakes than I have with people. That's fine by me. After what I saw in Vietnam, the quiet of the swamp has been my medicine. I was about to head back to the station when I noticed something odd. There were birds, maybe 6 or 7 of them, floating dead on the water. Now, finding a dead bird isn't unusual, but these were arranged in a perfect circle, like someone had placed them there. I rubbed my eyes. thinking the red sunset was playing tricks on me. But no, they were definitely in a circle. I reached for the good luck charm in my pocket, a piece of Vietnamese plant I keep in resin. It's a habit I picked up after the war. The familiar shape usually calms me down, but that evening it felt cold against my palm. The chorus of frogs and insects that usually fills the swamp at dusk had gone quiet. That's when I noticed the water. It seemed to be moving on its own, like it was breathing. There wasn't any wind, and the nearest gator was yards away. Just small ripples pulsing like a heartbeat. My radio crackled, making me jump. Bass to, "Tanner, you about done out there?" I pressed the button to respond, but kept my eyes on those dead birds. "Yeah, Jeff, just checking something out." "Well, hurry it up. Storm's coming in from the west." I should have listened, should have turned that boat around and gotten out of there. But I was a marine biologist before I was a ranger. When something doesn't make sense, I need to understand why. That's what my ex-wife used to say drove her crazy about me, always choosing work over everything else. Even our son, Tommy, who I haven't spoken to in 3 years, the sun dipped lower and the red light on the water got darker, more like rust than blood now. I started my boat's motor, but instead of heading back, I moved closer to those birds. The water around them had a strange smell, like old pennies left in the sun. As I reached out with my net to collect one of the birds for testing, the water beneath my boat vibrated, not like when a gator swims by. This was different. It felt deliberate, like something down there knew I was there, and that's when I heard it, a sound I'd never heard in 25 years of working these waters. A deep, wet sound, like someone slowly pulling their boot out of thick mud, but amplified 100 times. It came from somewhere in the darker water beyond the dead birds. I pulled my hand back from the water so fast I almost fell over. The sound came again, closer this time, and as the last red light faded from the sky, I swear I saw something move under those dead birds. Something big enough to make my 18-foot boat feel very, very small. Looking back now, I realized that was the moment everything changed. The moment the swamp I thought I knew so well started to reveal its true face. If I had known what was coming, the horror that was waiting in those dark waters, maybe I would have done things differently. But I didn't know. How could I? I was still thinking like a scientist, not a survivor. And in the Okefenokee, that's another mistake that can get you killed. I tried to convince myself that what I'd seen was nothing. Maybe I was just tired. Maybe the heat was getting to me. But the next morning, things got weirder. I was checking the kayak rental area. It's a small wooden dock where tourists can rent boats to explore the safer parts of the swamp. What I found stopped me in my tracks. All 12 kayaks were there, but they weren't tied up like normal. Someone, or something, had arranged them in a perfect circle, just like those dead birds. "Hey, Jerry!" I called out to the rental guy, but no one answered. The little rental shack was empty, with the sign still showing closed from yesterday. The guest log showed the last entry was 2 days ago. My hands were shaking a little as I reached for my radio. "Base, this is Tanner. Anyone seen Jerry today?" Static answered me. I tried again. Nothing but a strange gurgling sound coming through the speaker. I'd never had radio problems in this area before. That's when I noticed how quiet it was. Usually, this part of the swamp is full of life. Alligators sunning themselves on the banks, snakes swimming through the channels, birds everywhere. But there was nothing. The animals had left. I got in my boat and started checking the nearby camping areas. At the first sight, I found something that made my stomach turn. A tent was half sunk in the water, but the weird part was how it looked. The bottom half that had been in the water was dissolved. Not torn, not ripped, dissolved like someone had poured acid on it. The edges were all purple-red, and when I touched them with a stick, they felt slimy. The smell hit me next, like old metal and rotting plants mixed together. It was coming from the water, which had a strange shine to it, almost like oil, but clearer. I'd tested these waters 1,000 times, but I'd never seen anything like this. I found a waterproof camera floating nearby. My hands were trembling as I checked the photos. Most were normal tourist shots, sunsets, birds, alligators. Then I got to the last photo. My blood went cold. There, rising from the dark water behind some cypress trees, was something. It looked like a giant tentacle, but not quite. It was semi-clear, like jellyfish skin, with what looked like yellow lights inside it. I nearly dropped the camera when I heard a splash behind me. I spun around, but there was nothing there, just ripples on the water's surface moving against the wind. That's when my boat's depth finder started going crazy. According to the screen, the water under me was suddenly 100 feet deep. That's impossible. I knew this area was only about 8 feet deep. I moved the boat a few yards away, and the reading went back to normal. I needed help. This was bigger than anything I'd dealt with before. I tried the radio again, and this time it worked, but what I heard made no sense. Under the static, I could hear what sounded like words. Not English, not any language I knew, just rhythmic sounds that somehow felt like speech. A splash of water hit my arm, and instantly my skin started burning. I wiped it off quickly, but it left a red mark, like a mild chemical burn. The water had never done that before. I started the boat's motor, ready to head back and report everything. That's when I saw them. More dead birds, arranged in a new pattern. This time, they formed an arrow, pointing deeper into the swamp, toward the area we call the deep water. Local folks had always told stories about the deep water, stories I'd dismissed as superstition. They said there were things in there, things that had been around since before people came to these parts. I never believed them. But as I sat there, looking at those birds pointing the way, feeling my arm burn where the water had touched it, I started to think maybe those old stories weren't just stories after all. I had a choice to make. Head back and try to convince people something was wrong, or follow those birds and find out what was happening to my swamp. I knew what I should do, but I also knew what I was going to do. I turned the boat toward the deep water. Sometimes being stupid and being brave look exactly the same. I was about to find out which one this was. The deeper I went into the swamp, the more my hands shook on the steering wheel. The morning sun was high now, but somehow the water looked darker here. My phone had stopped working 10 minutes ago, and the radio was just making that weird gurgling sound again. That's when I heard someone calling my name. Ranger Tanner. Hey, wait up! I turned to see a small boat coming up behind me. It was Sarah Chen, a graduate student who'd been studying water plants in the swamp for the past month. She was smart, maybe too smart to be out here right now. Sarah, you shouldn't be here, I said. But she just pulled her boat up next to mine. I've been trying to call you, she said, holding up her dead phone. Something weird is happening to my research sites. All my sample plants are dissolving, and the water readings are all wrong. Before I could answer, we both heard it, that wet, sucking sound I'd heard yesterday, but louder. Much louder. What was that? Sarah whispered. I don't know, I said, but we need to. The rest of my words died in my throat. About 50 feet ahead of us, something broke the surface of the water. At first, I thought it was a log, but logs don't glow, and they definitely don't move like this thing did. It was huge, maybe as long as my boat. Its skin was almost see-through, like dirty glass, and inside I could see things moving, pulsing. Yellow lights dotted its body like eyes, and there were these arms, I guess you'd call them, but they didn't look like any arms I'd ever seen. They were more like tentacles, but jointed, like they had bones inside. That's impossible, Sarah whispered, already pulling out her camera. It looks almost like a giant salamander, but the bioluminescence and the size... Sarah, I said quietly, put the camera down and back your boat up, slowly. But she didn't listen. The creature turned toward us, and I saw more yellow eyes open along its side. The water around it started to look strange, thicker somehow, with a purple tint that spread out like spilled ink. That's when the headache hit me. It felt like my brain was trying to swim in my skull. I started seeing things that couldn't be there. Underwater cities made of coral, strange creatures swimming through ancient seas, civilizations that existed before humans walked the earth. "Sarah!" I tried to shout, but my voice came out slurred. "Get back!" She was holding her head too, but still fumbling with her camera. "But this is incredible. We need to document." The thing moved faster than anything that big should be able to move. One of those jointed tentacles shot out of the water and wrapped around Sarah's boat. The metal started sizzling where it touched. I grabbed my flare gun, the only weapon I had, and fired. The red light seemed to hurt it. The creature let go of Sarah's boat and sank beneath the surface, but I knew it wasn't gone. The water was still thick and purple all around us. "Start your motor," I told Sarah. "We're leaving, now." But when she tried, nothing happened. The metal of her outboard motor was partially dissolved, dripping like melted wax. "Get in my boat," I said, already reaching for her. "Quick!" She jumped across just as her boat started to sink, eaten away by whatever chemical that thing had released. Into the water. As I turned my boat around, I saw movement everywhere beneath the surface. Not just one creature, many. Or maybe it was all the same creature spread out through the water somehow. The hallucinations were getting stronger. I kept seeing ancient things, terrible things, rising from the depths of time itself. Sarah was clutching my good luck charm. I must have dropped it when I helped her in. "The Native Americans," she said, her voice shaking. "They had stories about something in the deep water. They said it slept most of the time, but when the waters got low, it wakes up," I finished. I'd heard the stories too, but I'd never believed them. Now I was wishing I had. My boat seemed to be moving slower, like the water was turning to syrup. Those yellow eyes were following us beneath the surface. And ahead, through my blurry vision, I could see something that made my heart stop. A wall of floating plants and debris blocking our escape route. The thing in the water wasn't just hunting us, it was trapping us, and somehow, deep in my bones, I knew that what we'd seen so far was nothing compared to what was coming next. The wall of plants ahead of us was too thick to break through. Behind us, those yellow eyes were getting closer. I could feel Sarah shaking next to me as I tried to think of a way out. "There," she pointed to a narrow gap between two cypress trees. "Maybe we can get through there?" I turned the boat, but as soon as we got close, I knew something was wrong. The water there looked different, clearer, prettier even, but my arm was still burning from where that water had touched it earlier. "It's a trap," I said, turning away. "That thing is making the water look safe, like a Venus flytrap, making itself pretty to catch bugs." We heard that wet, sucking sound again, closer now. Sarah grabbed my arm. "Look!" Through the trees we could see a small wooden dock. It was old and half broken, but it was land, real solid land. "If we can get to that dock," I said, "maybe we can." That's when it hit us. A huge tentacle, bigger than the others, slammed into the side of my boat. The whole thing tipped and Sarah screamed as she fell into the water. "Sarah!" I reached for her, but she was already going under. The water around her was turning purple. Without thinking, I dove in after her. The water burned my skin like fire, and those visions hit me again. Ancient seas, prehistoric creatures, things that should have stayed buried in time. But through the purple haze, I could see Sarah struggling. I grabbed her arm and pulled up, fighting against something that was trying to pull her down. For a second I saw it clearly, a massive shape under us, its see-through skin showing, organs and bones that didn't make any sense. Those yellow eyes were everywhere now, watching us. Somehow I got us both back to the boat and pulled us in. Sarah was coughing up water, her skin red and blistered where the water had touched her. The boat's motor was making a strange grinding noise. "The dock," Sarah gasped. "We have to get to the dock." I aimed for it, but the motor was dying. That thing had done something to it, just like Sarah's boat. We were about halfway there when the motor gave out completely. "There's paddles under the seat," I told Sarah. We each grabbed one and started paddling. Every splash of water that hit us burned. That's when I saw something that made me forget about the pain. On the trees near the dock were old carvings, Native American symbols. They looked like warnings. "Sarah, look at these markings," I said. As we finally reached the dock, "They're trying to tell us something." She was studying them too, her hands still shaking. "These are old, really old. This one looks like it's showing the creature, see? And here, I think this is showing how they fought it." The water around the dock started to move, making the whole structure shake. Those tentacles were rising again, but now we could see more of the creature. Its head was massive, with a mouth that opened sideways instead of up and down. Inside were rows of teeth that glowed like its eyes. "The carvings," Sarah said suddenly. "Look at this plant they drew. I've seen it before. It grows all over. The swamp. The Native Americans, they must have used it against this thing." She was right. I recognized the plant too. We called it swamp thistle. It grew everywhere, and the local folks used it for medicine. I'd always wondered why nothing ever seemed to eat it, not even the bugs. The dock creaked under us. One of the tentacles had wrapped around a support beam, and the wood was starting to dissolve. "We need to get to higher ground," I said, "away from the water. If we can just—" The whole dock shifted. Sarah lost her balance and fell against the railing. I heard the wood crack. "Sarah, don't move." I reached for her, but I was too late. The railing gave way. Sarah fell. This time, when the purple water closed over her, she didn't come back up. I screamed her name until my throat was raw, but there was nothing but ripples on the surface, spreading out in that perfect circle pattern I'd seen with the birds. The creature had her. And now it was coming for me. Standing on what was left of the dock, my skin burning and my head full of impossible visions, I realized something. This wasn't just about surviving anymore. I had to stop this thing. Had to make sure no one else ended up like Sarah. The Native Americans had found a way. Now I had to figure it out too, but first I had to get off this dock before it collapsed. And somewhere in the dark water, those yellow eyes were watching, waiting to see what I would do next. I ran through the trees, my feet slipping on the wet ground. The image of Sarah disappearing into that purple water kept flashing in my mind. Behind me, I could hear the creature moving through the water, following me. My only chance was to find that swamp thistle. It grew everywhere in the swamp, except I realized with a chill, in the areas where the creature had been. Maybe it knew to stay away from it. The ground under my feet was getting softer. The water level was rising, even though there hadn't been any rain. Somehow the creature was making the water rise, trying to force me back into its territory. That's when I spotted it, a patch of swamp thistle growing on higher ground. Its purple flowers were exactly like the ones in the Native American carvings. I started grabbing handfuls of it, ignoring the thorns that pricked my hands. A huge splash behind me made me turn. The creature was there, pulling itself partly onto land. In the full daylight, I could see how massive it really was. Its clear skin showed bones that looked almost human, but wrong somehow. Those yellow eyes weren't just on its head now. They were opening all over its body, all of them fixed on me. My head started swimming with those visions again. Ancient oceans, creatures that looked like this one, but even bigger, hunting in deep waters before humans existed. But this time, I saw something else too. People, Native Americans, fighting these things with smoke and plants. The creature's mouth opened sideways, showing those glowing teeth. One of its tentacles shot out at me, but I rolled away. The ground, where I'd been standing, sizzled and dissolved. I had the thistle, but what was I supposed to do with it? The visions had shown smoke. Then I remembered. My boat. The fuel tank was still almost full. If I could just get back there. But the creature was between me and the boat. The water was rising faster now, turning the ground into mud. Soon, there wouldn't be any dry land left. I looked around frantically and spotted a fallen tree. If I could get across it, I might be able to circle back to the boat. I started running, clutching the thistle to my chest. The creature followed, but it seemed slower on land. Its skin looked drier, less clear. Maybe it could only stay out of the water for so long. I made it to the fallen tree and started across. Halfway there, I felt it shift under me. One of those tentacles had grabbed the end of the log. The wood started to dissolve. I jumped, barely making it to the other side as the log crumbled into the water. The landing sent pain shooting through my ankle, but I couldn't stop. The boat was just ahead. When I reached it, my hands were shaking so bad I could barely open the fuel tank. I stuffed the thistle inside and grabbed my emergency. Flare. My last one. The creature was coming fast now, realizing what I was trying to do. A tentacle wrapped around my leg. The pain was worse than anything I'd ever felt, like being burned and crushed at the same time. With everything I had left, I aimed the flare at the fuel tank and fired. The explosion was bigger than I expected. The burning fuel and thistle created a thick purple smoke that spread out over the water. The creature's scream was like nothing I'd ever heard, not animal, not human, but something ancient and terrible. It let go of my leg. Through the smoke, I could see its clear skin turning cloudy, those yellow eyes closing one by one. It thrashed in the water, creating waves that nearly knocked me over. Then, slowly, it started to sink. The water level began dropping. The purple color faded, leaving normal swamp water behind. But as the last of it disappeared into the deep, one of those yellow eyes met mine. And somehow, I knew this wasn't over. The creature wasn't dead. It was just going back to sleep, back to the deep water where it had waited for who knows how many thousands of years. I stood there for a long time, watching the water, my leg burning where it had grabbed me. The swamp was starting to sound normal again. Frogs calling, birds returning, but things would never be normal for me again. My skin was burned wherever the water had touched it. My head was still full of those visions of ancient times. And Sarah. Sarah was gone. I knew I had to tell someone what happened, had to warn people about what was sleeping in the deep water. But I also knew nobody would believe me. All I could do was what the Native Americans had done: keep the warnings alive, help people stay away from the deep water, and hope that the creature would sleep for a long, long time. But every time I see a red sunset over the swamp, I wonder how long until it wakes up again. They found me the next morning, half conscious, on the shore. My leg was badly burned, and I was babbling about creatures in the water. The official report said I'd had a run-in with an aggressive alligator, and that Sarah had drowned in a boating accident. I tried to tell them the truth about the creature, the purple water, the ancient carvings. They sent me to doctors who said I was suffering from heat stroke and trauma. Eventually, I stopped trying to convince them, but my body told a different story. The burns from the creature's touch never fully healed. Even now, 5 years later, my skin turns red and starts burning whenever I get too close to swamp water. The doctors call it an unusual allergic reaction. I call it a reminder. I still work as a ranger, but I stay away from the deep parts of the swamp. I've mapped out all the areas where the Native American carvings are, all the places they marked as dangerous. I make sure the tourist boats stay far away from those spots. The local people believe me, even if they don't say it out loud. They've always known there was something in the deep water. Now when they see me limping on rainy days, they nod like they understand. They keep their boats in the shallow waters and teach their kids to do the same. Last month, a historian visited the station. She was researching old Spanish documents from the 1500s. She showed me something interesting. Reports of water demons in the Okefenokee, always appearing during long droughts. The descriptions matched what I saw that day. Sometimes, late at night, I still have those visions. I see ancient seas filled with creatures like the one I met. I see them sleeping in the deep places of the world. waiting for the waters to get low enough to wake them up. Sarah's family put up a small memorial near the ranger station. I leave flowers there every week. The official story says she drowned, but the local folks added something to the memorial in their own language. Translated, it means, taken by the old ones. My leg is aching as I write this. There's another drought coming. The Weather Service says it could be the worst one in 50 years. The water levels are dropping fast. Yesterday, I found 3 dead. Birds floating in a circle near the dock. I've started gathering swamp thistle, keeping it dried and ready. I've marked all the safe paths out of the swamp, and I've made copies of those old Native American carvings, just in case, because the thing about ancient creatures is they're patient. They can sleep for hundreds of years, waiting for the right moment to wake up. And when they do wake up, they're hungry. So if you ever find yourself near the Okefenokee, especially during a drought, stay in the shallow water. And if you see the water turning purple or spot something with yellow eyes watching you from below, run as fast as you can, because I won't always be here to warn people. But that thing in the deep water, it's not going anywhere. It's just waiting for the water to get low enough again, waiting for someone to venture too far into its territory, waiting to wake up. And next time, I don't know if swamp thistle and boat fuel will be enough to put it back to sleep.